Hello, Motorrad World fans, and welcome to this episode of Talking MotoGP with myself, Rob Portman, and joining me as always is Paul Scott. Paul, how you doing?
Yeah, Rob, very good, thanks. And you, I hope you sound like you got a bit of a hoarse voice. Have you been shouting at your kids again?
I've got a nice packed house here tonight. I've got my son with one of his closest friends, so they're upstairs here busy watching and playing and stuff. I've also got my beautiful nephew sleeping over, so nice packed house. But my voice is actually from Sunday night. Two of my all-time favorite bands. People that know me know that I like heavy music, and two of my all-time favorite bands, Madball and Born from Pain, who I never thought I'd ever get to watch live, played in London. So okay. I went through with my wife and a couple of mates on Sunday night and turned into a child again. And jumped on the stage and did some screaming and stuff. So yeah, it was awesome, but I'm paying for it now.
Yeah, still trying to recover.
No, it was cool. Really cool, really cool, and had a great time. So hopefully I'm going to make it through tonight's stream. But if I don't make it, I've got you, and we've got everyone else. And in pole position in the comments tonight is Wayne Taylor. Good evening, gents. Okay, sadly, I won't be making the chat tonight, but looking forward to listening to it tomorrow. That's the beauty of the show, is you can always just listen to it the next day if you don't watch it live. So it lives forever in the land of YouTube and Facebook. So Wayne Taylor is in pole position, but I think that's exclusion actually. So he's been excluded from the results there. Wayne Taylor makes a comment though. Casey Stoner called it 2 years ago that he believed Bez was one of the best riders on the grid in terms of riding technique and throttle control. Well, he's certainly proving that theory now. Well, Yvonne Pretorius is our actual pole sitter. Evening all, can't wait for the show. Paolo Chiacchetti, evening everyone. Looking forward to a great chat tonight. Marco just amazed us on Sunday, and Jean K 13131 on YouTube is in third place. Good evening everyone, I'm looking forward to the chat. What a crazy sprint race we had. David McBain, Brett Lawson, Ryan Martin, Gary Granger, Wade Williams, Dick Crosby, CP Buertz, Grant Furrows, Robert De Sosa, Al Camino, James Thompson, Jean-Pierre Granding, Alex Follioun, Al Roadhouse, Jonathan Tucker Mark, Wade Williams. Everyone is in the house. So a big thank you to you all for joining in the land of Facebook and YouTube. And yes, indeed, get yourselves nice and comfortable. We do have a lot to talk about. Appreciate Rob for making it to the podcast, being sick. Really great job for both of you. Thank you so much, Adithia Paquetti 917. Tumeling Morakile, great to have you as well. In Tumeling. Paul, I'm going to start just with a little bit of the South African focus with Rushay Woodley in the Moto3 category. Listen, after the disappointment of Brazil all round, I think, we spoke about it last week, the connection wasn't really there with the track and everything that happened and the holes, and what a way to bounce back. What a way. I mean, this weekend, watching all the categories, it had everything. Yeah, the action, the excitement, the drama, the highs, the lows, the everything. And COTA seems to be becoming one of those tracks that just produces it because of its layout. It's technical, demanding layout. There's one line through a lot of those sections. The tight hairpins where riders try and make up time and then land up crashing and stuff. So great racing through all three classes. Well done to COTA for putting on a great show. I had a big case of FOMO because fortunately I was there in 2022 with our good mate James Dent, and it was one of the best MotoGPs I've been to. It's a fantastic circuit, fantastic place to visit. Austin, it's a long way to get to, but anyway, well done to COTA. It was fabulous. And in the Moto3 category, our very own Rushay Woodley, we said after the start of the season we needed to see a little bit of something. It just nothing was really happening. He wasn't getting the results. The performances weren't there, but a better performance all round. He was unlucky in Q1. His fast time that he was setting then got cancelled because of all the yellow flags and stuff. But there was definitely a bounce back in performance there, and it was great to see. The result 16th place, was just outside the points, but it was great to see Rushay Woodley showing a little bit more of what we know he's capable of.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And we discussed it last week. We felt once he gets back onto, I'm going to say, familiar ground. People forget it's only his second season in the MotoGP paddock. So I think you're definitely a great endorsement for him. It will definitely give him a big boost in confidence. And next up, we got Jerez, where I feel he knows the track well. He's raced in the Spanish races there. I think he'll do really nicely. One thing I just want to mention about Moto3, which was quite strange, fantastic end to the race. But normally Moto3, which I've said on how many occasions, just pick a number and your guy will be there. To see only 4 of them at the front is actually quite strange. But saying that, what a great race. I mean, until they crossed the checkered line, you didn't have a clue who was going to win. So, yeah, it just shows those youngsters race, from start to finish, like everybody, but they are giving 110%. I really thought that was absolutely fantastic. One of those races where the unexpected happened, to see a Honda win it from 3 KTMs. Almost unexpected, but yeah, really, really good to see.
And that's we all know the struggles of KTM financially and as a company and that. And I know there's talks, and I haven't actually followed it any further about potentially Yamaha becoming a one-make Moto3 kind of category or some kind of thing. But if KTM were to lose that, it would be a big kick in the teeth, because if you look at how many KTMs are on the grid, and this is where you have to take your hat off to KTM, how many of through the Red Bull Rookies Cup, which they've supported since day one, in Moto3, the riders that they help through the system and then progressing to MotoGP and stuff, you got to take your hat off to them. And if they were to lose having that representation in that category, it would really probably be the biggest downfall, because they make a lot of money out of the racing division in that. But as you said, it was great. It's great to see Honda kind of committing them more. The only thing you do kind of want to see in there is more manufacturers. You remember the days of 125s when Aprilia was there, the Max Biaggis and Honda, KTM, really then Gilera, exactly. You had all the manufacturers. So the fact that it's just KTM and Honda's a little bit, but anyway, regardless of that, take nothing away from the racing. It's absolutely fantastic. And as you said, again, it was brilliant. And in terms of the South African boys, it was just great to see Richer getting a little bit more fight in there, and hopefully he can just kick on. The tough thing for Richer is now, when you have a kind of performance like that where you find a little bit of momentum, you want to keep at it and go straight on. He's got to wait a couple of weeks now.
Yeah, which is circumstantial. I mean, it should have been, I can't remember if Qatar was going to be next weekend or if there was going to be a break. But because of the drama going on in the Middle East, obviously no Qatar right now. Whether it takes place at the end of the year or not, time will tell. But so it's a 3-4 week break until we race in Spain. But then back to Europe, and I think a lot of people just feel more comfortable there. Even a guy like Richer, there's familiarity about it, where this chopping and changing and traveling, some people can adapt and some people less so. But I think once he's back in Europe, I hope we start seeing him. As I said last week, Rob, if he's running 12th to 15th in the points consistently, that's what we think. That's where I firmly believe he fits in, and now he needs to start doing that, with some regularity. And I think the pace from this weekend definitely shows he has the ability.
Yeah, fully agree with you there. So I'm on my cell phone tonight, so I'm just figuring out how this all works. There we go. Okay, I've got it. Anyway, great. Moto2 also very action-packed, and we'll touch a little bit on Moto2 a little bit later, because there's some rumors in the rider market that are certainly going to impact MotoGP going forward for next year, and it includes a couple of big names in Moto2, so we'll talk about that. But we go to MotoGP, and again, from the delay and everything that we had in Brazil, and struggling to get started straight away, MotoGP starts straight away. Marc throws it into an airbag at COTA, Marc Marquez at COTA, and this kind of kickstarts this chain of events that happens over the weekend, everything that happened in qualifying and stuff. So we all know. So a couple of talking points, let's call them. They've pretty much been discussed over the weekend until now, but it's worthwhile talking about them. I went and commented straight after the one practice session about the riders cruising online and the penalties that were. So there were 3 main incidences. Obviously, there was Marc's incident with Bezzecchi and Marini cruising on the line. Then there was Marc's incident with Enea Bastianini cruising online. And then, of course, Ayagura was also thrown into the mix when we were on board with Pecco Bagnaia, and he was going for a lap, and Ayagura not necessarily cruising online, but on an out lap. So now there's divided opinions, and please, again, everybody, open show, get your comments in. We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Paul and I have got the stage to kind of give ours, but we'll bring in all your comments and any questions, and that we'll try and keep it an open discussion. But Paul, the way that I saw it was, and I went straight onto Facebook and said, "This, I'm keen to see how Simon Crayford is going to handle this. Which way he's going to go there." And it 90% got it right for me. I definitely think Bezzecchi and Marini were penalty for the Marc incident. And I don't know, a couple of people were saying Marc made the most of it, and that the proof was he was on a fast lap, because he was only, if you look at the sector before, he was only 0.2 down. I do think that Marc was potentially going to come in that lap. And I do think the clever mind that Marc Marquez is came onto that back straight. He knows exactly what his sector. He knows his 0.2 or 4, whatever. He looked at the situation and he went, right, these guys are kind of cruising in my way. I'm not saying he did, but I can just see the mind and the way that Marc works. And he turned, not a tough situation. He took the most out of that situation, and he kind of put himself there, because he could have pulled out of that slipstream a long time before. But in his defense, they were cruising on the line. They were on a slow in lap. He was on, according to the sectors, a fast lap. They were on the line, so they got penalized. So I agreed with the Bezzecchi and Marini penalties. The Iagura, I do think, should have got a penalty, and I know the argument will be, but he's on his starting lap and he's warming up to start his fast lap. Yeah, but just because that's what you're doing doesn't mean, he has Pecco coming on a fast lap. He's gone out early. You've got to be aware of where you are on the track and your surroundings. I don't know if MotoGP need to have a new system where, the teams can talk on the dash. If Iagura's team can pop on his dash, like, listen, Pecco's on a fast lap. He's a second behind you. Iagura can figure out, right, in 3 corners time, this guy's going to be on me. There's got to be something there, because I do think Iagura deserved a penalty there. Then I look at the Marc and Anaya incident, and I can understand the justification of not giving Marc a penalty, because he did leave enough space for Anaya, and he wasn't necessarily online. But from a rider's point of view, if I was Anaya, I would be wanting a penalty, and I think Marc should have got a penalty, because it's a distraction either way. Marc is still cruising; he's not necessarily on the line, but Anaya is going from attacking and focusing fully on the corner to, right, is Marc going to turn? Has he seen me? Does he know I'm getting? You know what I mean? So it was a distraction. So, my view is they should have all got penalties.
Yeah, especially just going back to Iagura, he had someone. There were 3 or 4 of them in a row. Yes. And he was the last one. So the first one that Pecco came, I agree fully with your sentiment. But then the 2 in front of him, should they not also, they were equally at fault.
Yes.
Going to Marc and Bastianini, I agree as well. Marc was off the racing line, but, off the racing line by 10 centimeters versus off the racing line by 1.5 feet is a big difference. It's in Bastianini's peripheral vision. He's on a fast lap now. They react so quickly in their minds. He's thinking, is this oak going to move left or right? Has he given, and now he's there. So, I agree with that, Rob. I think it could have been dealt with differently. Whether they called Marc and Iagura into the stewards and Simon had a chat with them, we don't know. I don't know if you saw anything.
No,
but certainly it's becoming more problematic, and specifically, as we've discussed many times, because of the fact that qualifying has become so critical. If it was just you put in a fast lap and you got another half an hour or you got another session, it's not like that. Now it is critical. And we know the results of, if there is a yellow flag, that's your lap. Even if you are a second faster, that's your lap done, if it's through a sector where you get into. So, it's becoming an issue, and they're going to have to look at some way of addressing it. So, it's easier in Q2 because you've got less people on the track. But that Friday afternoon session, when everyone's trying to get into the top 10, it's hectic. Okay? So, I don't know what the solution is, but definitely it needs to be looked at.
Absolutely. I know a couple of comments here talking about, we've spoken about it before, the Super Pole kind of session and that. There's the dramatic effect that I like of this qualifying, that keeps you kind of on your toes, and the yellow flag and the who's going to get in the way and that. But that entertains us as a rider, I would just be going out on track going, okay, well, what, like, how do you play this? How do you play this qualifying? Do I go out early? Do I go out late? Do I follow? Don't I follow? So from that point of view, if I was the riders committee like they have, I'd be sitting down, as you said, saying, there's got to be another solution to this. With the yellow flag situation, can you not just add another lap? That if we look at Brazil, they seem to find time. So if the free practice, whatever session it is where it counts for the qualifying sessions, if that's extended by 5-10 minutes, I've been in the MotoGP paddock, and there's times where you stand there, okay, well, the sessions are over. I've got like 2 hours to kill here. It's like, just fill it up. The riders would gladly take another 5-10 minutes. Cool. And add that on.
But I think you'd have the same situation, Rob. Everyone's leaving it because no one wants to set their pole time in the first 5 minutes, because that's the benchmark. You want to do it on the very last lap. So I hear what you're saying, but I think if they extend it even by another 10 minutes, you're still going to get that flurry of laps in the last, give it to say the last 2 laps of time. So about 5 minutes, because that's when everyone wants to be the guy that, you hope you put your benchmark lap time in, and then Sector 1 and Sector 4 have yellow flags. I think they need to redress that yellow flag story, because it never used to be like that 4 years ago. Yes, I understand that when a guy's crashed, you got to respect that slow down, because like we've seen in the past, or even with the Guru on Friday, if you crash, when someone's crashed immediately, can have repercussions, marshals, riders getting injured. I understand all of that. But it also, it almost gets to a point where you wonder if someone's not being a little bit cynical and I'll just lose the front here because I posted my lap time and I can slow some. I'm not suggesting they do that in any way. But it almost, it becomes a point where, they might have removed the bike and the rider, or they're busy and he's in nobody's way, regardless of what happens. But the yellow flag is being waved and your best lap gets chopped. So, I do think, me personally, if it was up to me, that Super Pole we used to watch was the most, I think, the most pressure for a rider, because it's Manalian, and you've got to put now if you crash, it's your problem. You're not affecting somebody else's lap. So, difficult one, that's not going to happen. We know that, but they certainly need to come up with some kind of strategy. I don't know what it is.
Okay, so just a comment here from Hamath Kupala 7867 on YouTube. Hi, Rob and Paul. I'm a lap behind in the show. He's from India, so I'm going to go with a double long lap penalty there for you, Hamath. Sorry, you can't be a lap behind much on it. I'm sorry.
Not so early in the show. If we were in the last quarter, maybe. But, we haven't even set lap times yet.
Yeah. I'm not nice like Simon. I'm very strict. So double long lap penalty. I think the qualifying conversation is going to be one that just rolls on and on. And so it's going to be, there's going to be weeks where it's going to work out for your rider, and there's going to be weeks where it doesn't. And I suppose it's the same for everyone. I think that's ultimately what you have to look at it. But like the one Alex Fullion comment says here, and I think it's because we shine the spotlight a bit more on Brad. It just always seems like they get it wrong, or he gets caught up by yellow flags, or something. It always seems to impact him the most. But that's not the rules' faults. That's just how it goes.
That's how we perceive it to be. Yeah,
because it's hurting our man, of course. Then, Paul, looking at the overall results, I'm not going to go through each and every rider because we touched upon most of them last week. So, the main talking points are coming into COTA. We've said it in the build-up to COTA. It's been Aprilia domination. Aprilia have been doing it. Ducati have had to deal with this hard carcass tire that doesn't really suit their bike. Marc's still getting himself sorted. Pecco's still finding his way. And I think we were all looking for this final justification to really stand on the rooftops and go, right, Aprilia, Bezzecchi, and Martin are the real deal. And I think after this weekend, I think if you're standing on the top screaming, I wouldn't argue with you, because it was fantastic. Aprilia, Martin to win that sprint race the way he did, taking the gamble with the medium rear tire, the pass on Pecco, old school Martin, when it looked like Pecco had it summed up. Bezzecchi making the mistake on a Saturday again. It seems like he's going to do this route of, I'll show you, I'm going to win this championship without being a Saturday man, just purely being a Saturday man.
Yeah.
And I loved Rivola from Aprilia. I loved his comments after the race where he first said, listen, sorry to Trackhouse for Iagura and whatever. And, you know, Bezzecchi, what happens on Saturday seems to spur him on for Sunday. And all these kind of like elements that just grab you. You're just entertained the entire weekend, you know, at a race like this, rather than the Brazil, I should say. But, you know, Aprilia and their riders, TNT, I don't know if you guys get it with a normal MotoGP, but TNT do this. Neil Hodgson does this comparison where they literally overlay Marc Marquez and Bezzecchi on the Aprilia going through that first sector at COTA and the different lines and where the Aprilia strengths are. And that Aprilia, its biggest strengths, you know, going back to fans that know from the GP 125 and 250 days, was Aprilia always had a chassis. Even when I was testing, you know, the road bikes, the super bikes, they never necessarily had the overall horsepower. The electronics were a little bit, you know, sus compared to Ducati, or not as good, but they always had this chassis that you could just put where you wanted it. And it looks like they found that sweet spot again, because that comparison where Marc was going in, you could see almost forcing it to the apex and then having to lift up to kind of make this. Aprilia was just putting it where you wanted, you know. Martin the same, Agura the same, Ralph Fernandez, there were bits of him, but not enough there. And you just look at that and you go, just hats off to Aprilia, just really hats off. And one big key factor to that I noted, Paul and everyone, was there was that Stellacchini, I think is his surname. So he started life out at Ducati. He was one of Jeezy's right-hand men. Okay, built the Ducati that we all know that dominated the years. KTM then went and he was one of the guys KTM and went and spent all the money, probably $1 billion out of the $3 billion that were in debt to go get Ducati guys. Got all these Ducati guys, and this is where again you've got to. And I feel bad because KTM are the sponsors of the show. Big thank you to KTM South Africa for sponsoring the show. But I'm going to give you a little kick in the teeth here. This is where KTM don't seem to. So they had this guy who's gone to Aprilia and in 1 year has turned the whole thing around. I'm not just saying it's him. I know it's a combined effect. But, you know, the guys come in and clearly something's changed. KTM had this guy for over a year and a half. And they couldn't really make change. Now, whether that's down to, again, the WP suspension and Olin's factor, I don't know. Whether it's down to the Austrians just saying, okay, we like your input, but we're right, you're wrong, and you got to do things our way. I just look at that and I go, here's Aprilia, this tiny company, taking in these resources and getting the best out of them. And that's something that KTM haven't been able to do. And it's a big feather in their cap because, you know, Aprilia is the new reference in MotoGP. They have overtaken Ducati after this weekend, and they are stamping their authority on this championship. And it's great to see. After last year, even being a Marc Marquez fan, there were times we were going, okay, this is great, but we need more competition. The competition's certainly there now.
Well, Rob, if we go back to probably the week before Japan last year, I can't remember where it was. I'm presuming Marc podiumed or won. And at that point, and I say the week before Japan, because Marc only went to Japan to win the World Championship. He had no intention of winning the race. If it had happened, he would have taken the win, but he needed the points just to sew it up. But before that, we were saying, yes, Ducati are miles ahead. Then suddenly Marc wins in Japan, gets hurt the week after, and that turns Bezzecchi's fortunes. He suddenly, for whatever reason, he jumps a step ahead. Okay, so I don't think too much changed with Aprilia last year, except Bezzecchi found what he had already found after the first 4 or 5 races. But this year, exactly what you say, where we saw the Ducati domination, they now on the back foot. There's absolutely no doubt. You know, and you know me, I'm a Marc Marquez guy. First of all, I'd like to say in the sprint race, he must have had a chat to Frankie Morbidelli before the race, because he certainly had a Frankie moment, no doubt.
We'll talk about that.
And as much as I love De Gea and Antonio, who would have ever said 3 races in, De Gea would have more points? He'd be the leading Ducati. Never. Not in a month of Sundays. First, we would have said Marc. Then we probably, based on last year, would have said Alex or Pecco, and then De Gea. You know, he's the forerunner. And how many times has he put Marc away? properly. So that's a different discussion which we'll have later. But going back to Aprilia, in the space of, and we've got to say it's in the space of 8 weeks, from the test in November to the test in 9 weeks in January, end of January, they've obviously done the most homework, because they now have a bike that, and we can't say it's Bezzecchi only.
No.
Martin is showing his true colors, how talented he is, and I'm giving him credit. Remember last week I said he was my rider of the weekend.
Yes.
He's going to be a threat to this championship. And they've just, as a collective, the bike is good. Ayagura, I mean, the fastest race lap of the weekend, Ayagura. Unfortunately, the bike went into limp mode or whatever it was. He certainly would have podiumed. I have absolutely no doubt about that. So, they've moved the goalposts in terms of Aprilia by the most. We said at the beginning of the year, everyone else has improved by 5%, maybe Ducati's improved by 8%. I think Aprilia have improved by 15%. And we said, when we get to COTA, we'll really see how good they are. Well, just, and I mean, we know Maverick 2 years ago, brilliant there on an Aprilia, but exactly what you say, the bike looks easy to ride, which is how Marc made the Ducati look last year, and Alex. But this year, Aprilia, now we're suddenly saying, oh, sure, let someone else win because it's going to get boring. Can't blame Aprilia. I've always said that. The guys, they put in so much work behind the scenes that we don't see. We see Bezzecchi, Martin, Ayagura doing a great job. But it's the Sturlakinis, the Rivolas behind the scene that are doing so much work. And suddenly, just like that, everything falls into place. You've got the riders in place. Well, big ups to them. And I tell you what, it's putting pressure on everybody.
Big up to Rivola as well, because he's certainly, they've had their big cloud over them certainly last year with the Martin and how he handled that. He stuck by his guns. He didn't get bullied by Martin and the personality that he is, and his management, and the fact that he's the MotoGP world champion, stuck to his guns, put his foot down, and he's managed. He's got Aprilia. He's also a big part, probably the biggest part of getting Aprilia where they are now. Yeah. But now he's having to make this choice again to finish off the Aprilia conversation before we move on to Marc and Ducati and everyone else. Aprilia have got this. They've got this fantastic thing that they potentially going to get 1-2 in the World Championship, whether it's Bez or Martin. Still a long way. I don't think Marc's out of it by any means, but Aprilia are going to be challenging for this title. I think that's one thing we can all agree on. They have this problem now. Have they jumped the gun? Have they now shot their bullets too early? Have they now gone, okay, Martin, goodbye, and Pecco, hello? And the same for Martin, sitting here going, geez, luck, This could be, and the Pecco deal sounds like it's a 4-year deal, so they've gone and they've committed, and they're looking at this going, we could have such a good thing for the next couple of years if you're keeping Bez and Martin. It's easy to say these things as well while the grass is green and Martin's doing well. Anything can happen. But it's definitely something for them to consider on both parties, Aprilia's side and certainly Martin's side.
Well, Rob, I mean, just think of it from Martin's point of view. He's supposedly going to Yamaha. Yeah. From winning a sprint race, winning a podium last week, challenging for the win this week in the main race, to a bike that's the last 4 on the grid. So in his head, he must be thinking, unless he's more of an idiot than we give him credit for, and no disrespect, I don't believe he's an idiot. But unless he's thinking, he must be, if he signed a letter of intent with Yamaha, he's got big problems. We were expecting them to have announced that already. Can he, like we saw with Marc going to the factory Ducati and Pramac losing the Ducati deal, is there a possibility that Martin can now turn around and say, oh, actually, you know what? I think I'll stay where I am. We've got no idea to that. The talk of the town, as you say, 4-year deal for Pecco. Are Aprilia also not going to, nothing's been announced. Has it been signed? Is it all just speculation, intent? I don't know. It's a difficult one. The one who's smiling the most is certainly Bezzecchi, because his deal is done. Yeah. So the others, I think right now there's a queue of riders and managers knocking on Aprilia's door, and rightfully so. Whether those deals are done or not done, time will tell. But I would hate to be Martin having this beginning of the season and thinking, sheesh, I've got to jump on that Yamaha next year, and look where they are. man, your brain has to be fried just thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, like Dirk Kutzer says, and we spoke about it last week. I think money is a big motivating factor when you go to a Yamaha and stuff. They've got 3-4 times the budget of the Aprilias and the Ducatis and everyone else. So that's ultimately the big reason why Martin's making the move. He'll get 3-4 times the salary he's getting now at Aprilia, and Yamaha. It's Yamaha. You have to see them at some point getting this right. Whether that's going to be going into the new 850 era or whenever that's going to happen, they have to get it right. So I agree with Oli Moito's comment here. I haven't put it up, but he kind of said it is a mistake. Pecco looks finished. I don't know if Pecco looks finished, but he certainly doesn't look like the headstrong, unbeatable force that he used to. I think the Martin Bezzecchi, the respect that they have for each other, but that competitive nature they have against each other as well, it works. I think Pecco, he's conceded to Marc, if you know what I mean, whereas a Martin will never concede, even though Bears this quote, love what you're doing, great, you're winning, but I'm never going to concede to you. I am the man. And Bezzecchi looks like he's got that status over the last year and a half. We've spoken about it. I think he started as the, okay, Martin, you're number one. Hi, can I play with your toys type thing? But they're both on this level of, no, I'm going to win. No, I'm going to win. Whereas I think Pecco's already gone, the Marc's the number one rider in there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Again, from my internal hearings and stuff, it's a done deal. Pecco has signed the 4-year deal with Aprilia. He's going. Martin is going factory Yamaha. It won't be Monster Energy. It'll be factory Yamaha. Don't know what sponsor they'll get. So that looks like a done deal. And but let's see how it plays out. Either way, Aprilia, great start to the season. I mean, Bezzecchi, 5 in a row, most consecutive laps now, leads that, has overtaken Jorge Lorenzo. And if you had said to me a year ago, 2 years ago, that Bezzecchi would be doing this and breaking these records in Aprilia, I don't know if I'd be agreeing with you,
Absolutely.
And we know at the end of last year he became the biggest challenger to Marc. We know how good he was, but him and Aprilia had shown so much inconsistency before that, and they've just turned it around. Put the soft tire in, no problem. Put the medium tire in a sprint race, no problem. Crash. Lose, get knocked by Pedro Acosta and lose wings in the main race, no problem. They just seem to have an answer for everything at the moment, and it is great to see. As much as I don't like seeing a guy like Marc battle the way he is, although we'll touch upon it now. I think it was very much his own making this weekend. It's great seeing the likes of Aprilia, KTM with Acosta, DJ Antonio, as you pointed out. So we'll get on to them now. But to finish the Aprilia conversation, brilliant. Long may it continue, and it's going to be exciting to also see that in-house battle between Martin and Bezzecchi and how that evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mustn't discount Ayagura. If he gets his qualifying better and he starts in the first 2 rows the way, because he can clearly ride the bike as well as Martin and Bezzecchi. But it doesn't help you when you're coming from 10th, because you waste half your race getting into a position where you can now challenge for a top 3, top 4. If he can get, and he said his qualifying is his shortcoming at the moment. And just watch him, Rob. You think Bezzecchi is smooth. He's even smoother. He is just, he looks like, to me, he's got the exact same style as Anaya Bastianini when Bastianini's on it, like we saw him this weekend. They almost Jorge Lorenzo-esque, where it's just millimeter perfect. And that's one thing with Agura, and on a bike that's performing. Look, I don't think he's got it in him to win the championship, and specifically not this year, because he's got to race Bezzecchi, who's certainly at the moment the class of the field. But, he's going to certainly suddenly be the spanner in Marc and Digi and Bagnaia's works, going forward. They're not only going to have to worry about the 2 factory Aprilias, they suddenly got this Oak, who is super talented, super smooth, can be aggressive when he needs to be, but he makes overtaking. I mean, we hardly even noticed him coming from 10th because he was 10th, then he was 9th, then he was 8th. He passes, there's no issue to it. It's not a Marc Marquez or a Jorge Martin pulling old school pass. It's just smooth as butter, does the job, gets the drive, and off he goes. So, yeah, I think we must watch him too. Not that we're discounting him by any means, but the way that bike is going just shows exactly what you say, especially that sector one, left, right, single line, but you need corner speed and maneuverability. Man, they were brilliant through there.
And, you look at the top speed. I mean, I was flabbergasted when that thing came on the back straight, could slipstream and pass a Ducati, a KTM. Iagura could line up DJ Antonio, pass him on the brakes where Marc couldn't. I know it was earlier, later on in the race. But as you said, it's how effortless they make these things look. Okay, Martin's move on Pecco wasn't effortless, but he was able to put himself in that position because of the machinery that he had. It's just they've got every box ticked.
And a pass like Martin on Bagnaia, sometimes you want to just do that. Should we call it an authoritative overtake, where you're saying, listen, I'm not here to play. I might run a bit wide and you undercut me, but I'm going to do the same thing again. And I think it's kind of for those guys, it's almost like a power struggle. Well, okay, I'll show you who's boss. Where Iagura, he doesn't worry about that. He is, and I remember from his Moto2 days, that's how he was. You didn't notice him till suddenly he was top 3, because I'm going to say he's silky smooth. His overtakes are, he's lined the oak up 6 corners before. He knows exactly what he's going to do. He gets the perfect exit and entry into 2 or 3 corners, and the deal is done.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it, Paul. You're absolutely right. Another thing I love about Iagura, I said it last week, is the maturity, and he showed it again this weekend. Such a pity that happened to him, and I liked I liked Trackhouse's response as well. Obviously gutted, hated it, but we're there. We're showing our potential. And Iagura, if I look at and again, take nothing away from a Fabio Quartararo or a Martin in that ways, but there was, those guys show emotions. They break screens, they throw their visors off, good and bad way, and they show that emotion, which is, I don't mind emotion. It's a good thing. But Fabio Quartararo will stand next to his bike and cry when Iagura, the bike broke. He was going to finish on the podium. His first MotoGP podium. Not his first. Is it his first?
Well, his first. First.
Bike breaks. He gets into bits. Walking dejected, but no getting in the pits and hitting the board, and takes his helmet off. Calm, collected. The maturity of, like you said, it's just that like that proper samurai, like this warrior that's been trained to attack. You've lost, so you must, Bruce Lee this now and just take it like a man. And I love the Agura exercise, and exactly the way you've explained it. I've never really looked at it like that, but you've hit the nail on the head there. He's not there and then he's there. He's just that like silent assassin that just makes his way through. And I think that's going to be a conversation that, as you said, had his rookie year last year, made all the mistakes that a rookie would make, the learnings, the hard times, the ups, the downs, and everything. Now he's on this Aprilia that's sweet, and this is, he's going to take full advantage of that. He had a good start to last year as well. Then you take into consideration crashes and injuries and stuff. Those things will no doubt still come. But you look at him at the first start of the season, didn't finish outside the top 6, was in the mix for the championship. This weekend, had a couple of, again, the way he reacted from a couple of crashes, he could have easily, after the crashes in qualifying and stuff, just, let me just finish. And that's why you weren't looking for him coming through the race, because it's like, he's had such a cock weekend, there's no ways he's going to come through. And he came through. So, massive hats off to Aprilia, the whole project, to Iagura, Trackhouse, the factory team, Martin, Bez, long may it continue, because it certainly has given us that extra boost to watch MotoGPs on Sundays. Listen, as much as I like it, I don't want it to happen every single race.
Give someone else a turn.
Give someone else a turn. Let's quickly, and I want to just touch on this comment here quickly by Brett Lawson as we get onto the Ducati conversation. Why in the Ducati camp does one rider always do well and the other rider badly? Even when it was Pecco and Anaya, Aprilia seemed to give both riders time of day. And it's a very valid comment, because it's happened year on year on year on year. When Lorenzo joined, he struggled to kind of find that connection. I think almost more with the team than anything else, because as soon as it did click, his contract was over and he had already been shown the door. And Dovi was the focus. And then, when Petrucci came in, he was always going to be second to Dovi. Miller, was always going to be second to Pecco in many ways. Nea Bastianini was always going to be second to Pecco. And you kind of wonder why, did Ducati always overlook Martin because of, I mean, I firmly believe they looked over him because he has this, child mentality sometimes, and maybe his management as well. But did they also overlook him because he was going to be too much of a competitor in many ways? But then they go and sign Marc, and Marc's very much the number one. So they don't seem to find the balance where Aprilia have found this balance, which is a huge credit to them as well, because I've always said it, there can only be one in a team. We saw it with Yamaha, with Lorenzo and Rossi, and it's not favoritism. We're seeing it now with KTM, with Pedro Acosta. It's not necessarily favoritism. It's just, that side's performing better than that side. Rossi and Lorenzo got the exact same engine, the exact same handlebars, the exact same everything. There's always going to be a winner and a loser in a team. And down to Brett's comment there, I think we're looking at the Aprilia now going, well, who's going to be the winner and the loser there? Because they're both winners. Martin's taken that leap now. He's dug himself out of hell. He's been to hell and back. And this is where I just give massive credit to him. Again, I can say he acts like a child in that every now and then, which I still think he does. I don't agree with smashing screens after you've won the race, but that's just the emotion of Martin. But to come for everything that he's been through and to still be there challenging and still have that hunger to get out there and challenge and do what he does is absolutely phenomenal. But, looking from the Ducati side, how are they getting it wrong? We've always said Ducati's management does seem to be very ruthless. Todozzi seems to have this very ruthless kind of nature to him. It's like, if you're not performing, then I'm going to give you the cold shoulder, kind of like Pecco's getting at the moment. So, do you have any comments on it? Anyone else in the comments have any to say?
Yeah, Rob, the point is very, very valid. I think what's happened with Aprilia, they've just had the chips fall into place, I'm going to say by mistake, by Martin's mistake last year, when he couldn't, for the first 4 months of the season, he didn't ride. He couldn't help Bezzecchi. Bezzecchi got the bike to a point where it suits him, and it looks like Martin can adapt to that. Possibly their riding styles are very, very similar, although they don't look it. But it just seems like, I think Aprilia, we know 100% beginning of last year, Martin was the number one rider. He created his own problems by all the crashes he had at the beginning of last season in the walk. We know that drama, which reversed the tables to put Bezzecchi in a position we would never have accounted for him being there. He grabbed it, we've discussed it. So I think what's happened is, by default almost, they've now got two number one riders who are acting like two number one riders, as opposed to Pecco maybe 3 races in last year. Okay, one at COTA because Marc fell off, which was the third race. But by the end of that, he was kind of, yes, Marc's giving me a proper hiding. So maybe I'll just settle down in second place. Where I think with Aprilia, they are not thinking like that. And that could be the difference. Exactly the point whoever made it. Ducati have always had a defined 1 and 2. Always. There's never been a question about it. Aprilia might now have realized that, as we discussed 2 seasons ago when we had 8 Ducatis on the grid, or last year, the collective works better when everyone shares. Maybe the factory Aprilia have realized, let's not upset this apple cart. Leave them as is. You're not number 1, you're not number 2. You are factory riders. We treat you equally. You get everything the same. We're not going to build the bike towards a Bezzecchi or Martin. You ride your bike, and long may it last going forward. I think that must be, and that boils down to management.
Yeah.
Which we discussed from 2 years ago when Maverick and Espargaro almost, we said management should take control. I think their job is a lot easier this year. And by not stepping in or by guiding, whatever they're doing it right. And I think they're just going to leave it as is. That's how I see it. And let the championship decide itself.
I think the biggest part I took there out was the collective. I think you've got it right there, Paul. I think that the fact that Aprilia are more an open book. They've always had this team, Aleix Espargaro was captain. They've always had a bit more of a vibe, and it definitely does seem to work with him in that case. Like, it's more of an open book policy kind of feel to it with Aprilia, and it's definitely working. I mean, we could spend the whole show talking about Aprilia and how well they're doing, but I think we've kind of got that subject perfectly. I just want to touch on this comment here from Judah Spree on YouTube. Hi, I'm from Turkey. Could you comment on about Toprak? I wonder your opinions about him, whether he is better than expectations or not. So, Judah, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. I think you're our first proper Turkish fan joining us on the show, so it's great to have you. We will
tell your mates about us.
Yeah, tell all your mates about us, because we are massive Toprak Razgarioglu fans. Yeah, we will be talking about Toprak and Yamaha a little bit later, but I can tell you from my side, and I think speaking for a lot of people on here, Toprak is a fundamental part to MotoGP and to Yamaha, especially. Love having him in the championship. Huge fan. This is just the start of things. I think his talent and his expectation and where he should be way outweighs of where the Yamaha is at the moment. But we'll talk a little bit more further about him later. But thank you so much for joining us. Paul, I just want to finish. Let's get back onto the Ducati conversation. So you touched upon it earlier, the Marc and the sprint race and the DG and that. I shared the exact same sentiments as you while I was watching this play out. It's like, if you had told me that the rider in MotoGP that would finally really get under Marc Marquez's skin and upset the apple cart would be Fabio Di Giannantonio, I would have laughed at you. Because even Rossi, with everything that happened with him and Rossi, it didn't seem to affect Marc. You know, Marc went on and carried on winning. Marc had the crash, and that was the biggest handicap. But no rider ever really got under his skin. And if it did, he kind of dealt with it. Di Giannantonio seems to have found this weak spot with Marc Marquez, because sprint race starts, the race starts, Marc is struggling first couple of laps with Ducati. He came out and he said, I just can't get flowing the first couple of laps. And we saw it in the main race on Sunday again, you know. Slow start. Yes, he had the long lap penalty, but towards the end of the race, the guy was doing the same times as the leader. You know, as the race went on, he gets comfortable. The bike works better. He can turn it. He can brake. All's well. Di Giannantonio, you know, and again, you look at the whole Ducati situation. DG's had his factory contract taken from him, and now all of a sudden he's performing like this miracle guy, like Alex did last year. You know what I mean? Like he's just. I think the pressure that comes with this factory Ducati contract just seems to play on riders' minds, or I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but Digi is shining. So Digi, the start of the sprint race, shoves it on the inside in a left-hander. So left-handers are Marc's corners. You're not like passing him in left-handers. You don't pass him in left-handers, especially on the opening lap when he's got a good start from the second row. I'm in the mix, right? I'm going after these Aprilias. You know, this is COTA. I am the king of COTA. I'm going. And he gets this luminous yellow VR46 machine, which makes it worse. And a Di Giannantonio after Brazil, which makes it worse. And leading Ducati rider in the championship, which makes it worse. Shoves it on his inside. And then I promise, and I know this is going to sound like a sales speech or like I'm the guru of MotoGP. I thought it was going to be the hairpin before you get onto the back straight. Marc's going to shove it on the inside and he's going to take both of them down. I swear, hand on Bible, I'm watching this and I'm going, Marc's going to retaliate. It's too early. There's not enough heat in the tire. And we've seen Marc make these mistakes at COTA. Those kind of corners, COTA invites that kind of thing. Yeah. They're both going down. Anyway, they make it through the left-hander onto the back straight. Okay, I was wrong. Then Marc gets the slipstream, comes from miles back, puts a stupid move on. It was never going to happen. Absolutely never going to happen. I'm glad Marc took responsibility for it. Doesn't help in the moment though, and like I said, ruined his whole weekend. And takes DG out, and it was a pure sign of pressure, desperation, and, you know, all those things that Marc. You normally you could put your house on. Marc doesn't buckle under those situations. I know Ollie Moto and a couple of other people have said, you know, like it's not a Frankie Morbidelli head loss moment, it's a Marc moment. He's done it his whole career, and that, you know, Rossi did these things. I watched this YouTube the other day of like the best MotoGP races, and again, it's like Rossi taking Gibana out at Jerez, you know, blatantly taking him out and then wheeling over the line like he did nothing wrong, which I loved at the time. It was like, yes, that's racing. And then Casey Stoner taking him out, you know, in the corkscrew. And this, but that's why we loved them, because they just had this relentless, I'm going to win at all costs. And I've said it from day one. Marc Marquez exists because of Valentino Rossi. Marc looked at Rossi and went, no, that's what I'm going to do. And he turned into that. And that's, you know, anyway, that's another story for another day. But I don't think it was necessarily it wasn't. I know the Marc Marquez moments that these guys are talking about, where he's taken riders out and he has done stupid things. I know that. But that was fighting for a win. That was, going for thing. This was a completely different situation to me. This was like, I cannot keep letting this kid wipe my nose and making me look like an idiot. I'm the best rider. I'm the world champion on the best bike. I've had a tough start to the season. The Aprilias are beating me. These Aprilias are too fast at the start of the race. They are going away. You're in my way now. DG, I'm tired of you. Stop bullying me. Get out. It was a frustration. That was the first real frustration, stupid moment I've seen from Marc, where another rider has really got under his skin. The pressure's on. He doesn't really have an answer at the moment. He doesn't. Him and Ducati don't have an answer. And he had to do whatever he could, and it backfired against him and ultimately ruined his whole weekend. Because I look at the Sunday race, the pace was there. He had the pace. Okay, it took him 4 or 5 laps to get, or 6 laps to get into the pace, but the pace was there for potentially a podium or something. Okay, maybe not with Iagura there, but there was a potential for a better weekend. But I just saw Marc buckle for the first time, and I saw a rider that, even sitting in the pits and everywhere, that the smile wasn't there. I saw a defeated, exhausted, like, I don't know what to do, Marc. And that's the first time I've ever seen it.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with everything you've said, except I think I certainly think he had his worst brain fade moment that he's had for a long time. Yes, he's had vicious passes on other riders. That's been his career. He's been a hard racer. This was exactly what you say, almost panic mode. And when I read that, he said, oh no, he didn't realize how much the slipstream was going to affect him. Come on, Marc, it's not your first time. You've been riding these bikes for many years. You're on the Ducati. It's your 3rd season. You know exactly what to expect. That to me was, Marc never makes excuses. He stands up for whatever he's done, whether it's his fault or not. And he normally just takes or accepts the situation and moves on. It's the first time I've thought, definitely the pressure, Rob. So now he's making an excuse. And in hindsight, what he needed to do, and he knows the first 3 laps or 4 laps, he's struggling. 3 or 4 laps behind Digia, he would have been okay. But that's exactly what you say. Digi's got into his head and he panicked. And I think he obviously saw the Aprilias ahead of him, and Bagnaia was there. He just thought, I need to do something. And it was definitely not his finest moment. And as you say, ruined his weekend, but self-inflicted, absolutely. And Shane, when they showed him, I think it was Sunday after the main race, when they showed him in the pits, you're quite right. He looked like a dejected person. You never see Marc look so sullen, but he's got pressure. There's no doubt. This is not going anywhere near what he thought it would be.
Yeah, John COTA and a couple of other comments. Obviously, there's going to be, it's forever going to be the Marc haters, or the people that don't quite understand Marc, and it's fine, each to their own. John COTA, Marc always makes excuses. I don't agree with you there. So, John, I think Marc, as Paul, you've pointed out, I think he made an excuse this weekend with the slipstream and that, but I've never seen Marc, I wouldn't call them excuses. When you're in that hive and that pressure that is a motorcycle racer and at that level, and you've got that competitive nature, you can't put yourself in that situation. You can't understand that situation that they're in. A rider will always back himself no matter what. Other than the comment about the slipstream, Marc came out and said, I deserve a penalty. It was stupid. He went to DG, said sorry. What if that means anything to anyone? I don't know. To me, it shows a bit of sportsmanship, and I want to see a Marc going and saying sorry, because I've been on both sides of that in my motorcycle racing, and I know it's nowhere near this level. I know that, but any sportsman that has been in that kind of situation, there's a way to deal with it, and there's a way not to deal with it. And Marc's had to grow up, especially since the accident, and I think he has. I think he's made him a better rider. I spoke about it last week. Marc's got this huge pressure of, I don't think Marc wants to carry on necessarily, maybe not next year, but certainly beyond 2027. I don't think Marc wants to continue. I think Marc wants to wrap up this 10th world title this year, maybe give a year on 850s a chance. But and he's seeing this 10th title slip away from him, and that's panicking him because his body's hurt. This guy's going to bed every night in pain. You know, he can't find answers. He's being bullied. I looked. Marc got bullied by Nea Bastianini. You know, other riders can smell blood in the water. This is the most fragile that Marc's looked. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I love the fact that Nea Bastianini was fighting back. I love the fact that Digi's fighting back. Said it all along. That's the way to beat Marc. Fight fire with fire. And Digi's doing it. You know, while the Pecos and that are maybe backing out, and the Alexes are giving him too much respect. Don't give him the respect, but fight fire with fire. And Marc's not used to this. Marc's not used to at a COTA having a Nea Bastianini up the inside of him at a left-hander, a Digi, and he's going and he has no answers for it. And when he is trying to push, he's crashing doing it. So Marc is in this world of, I don't know what to do at the moment. This break couldn't have come sooner for Marc. You know, we talk about how it's not good for the Richets and potentially Aprilias with his momentum. It's the perfect time for Marc and Ducati. They need this more than anyone because, it was a fragile Marc. It was, again, it's good for the championship because you want your champion to win, you know, in the tough times. Last year, it was made in many ways too easy for him.
Too easy, yeah.
So that in that way, I'm enjoying it. I don't see any MotoGP rider struggling. You know, I don't like to see that from anyone. And I don't want anyone to think that this is self-inflicted. You know, this weekend was self-inflicted. Marc struggles. I have no doubt about that. But it was self-inflicted because of the pressure and everything that he's under. And again, it's a credit to Aprilia because they've thrown that pressure on. Marc doesn't have this luxury of, okay, Aprilias, you go the first 3 laps, I'll catch you. And not just Aprilias. He's got this Pedro Acosta on this KTM that's an annoyance. He's got this Ayagur that's potentially coming. He's got this DJ Antonio that's just not scared of him. You know, you can pass me, I'm going to pass you back. I don't care. You know, so Marc needs this break, and he's got to find something when he comes back after this break, going straight into Spain, back into Europe, and big questions need answering from both Ducati and Marc.
And Rob, they're going to Jerez, which is a track where also Marc's supposed to win. And he didn't win there last year. His brother won there. So, you know, he's going to arrive at a track, whether he's, you know, we don't know what his physical condition is. I think they're overplaying that. I could be 100% wrong. But I think it's adding to the overall pressure that Marc's under. It's not coming easy. The bike is not quite where him or any of the Ducati riders would want it to be, but he seems to be struggling more than the Marc of 2025. And if there is a little bit of a shoulder discomfort, that's not helping. So like you say, this 3-week or 4-week break certainly is coming at the right time. He will spend a lot of time in Italy with Gigi and seeing what they can do. I have no doubt about that. Obviously, they're restricted in what they can do, but they need to, you know, whether it's the bike balance or whatever it is, they'll be throwing ideas left, right, and center. And he's going to have to come back to a track where he's expected to win. And if he can't find that feeling, which is unlike Marc, normally he can ride around the feeling, the problem. If he can't find that in the first 3 or 4 laps, he's going to be back to where he was. You know, and then are we going to see more of these Marc Marquez, that's why people don't like him moments? Or is he going to be able to contain that and realize, listen, I've got late race pace. Yeah, there's going to be times where it'll work and times where it won't. But if he's in the gravel trap, it's not going to help him in any way. So yeah, definitely the roles from last year to this year are completely different. And I think that's part of the reason why he hasn't announced whether he's re-signing or not. I'm quite sure he will, but I think he might be at a point now, if that injury is as bad as the commentators make out, he might be saying, listen, I might not even carry on after this year. I don't think he's at that point, but you never know.
You know, James Dent, I was speaking to James Dent at the start of the year, beginning of the year, and he was telling me, mark my words, this could be potentially Marc's last season. And I was like, oh, shut up, man, James.
Yeah.
You know, just shush now. I know more than you do. Just sit in the corner and shush now, please. But you look at it now, and there's a bit of relevance to it. Yeah, there's a bit of relevance to it. Brett Lawson makes a comment here of, you don't think the high-speed crash on Friday threw Marc off a bit that weekend? There's no doubt that the thing with that crash is, Marc came out and said, it's COTA, it's my track, it's my Ducati, I feel unstoppable there. And that's been all of his crashing. Going into the weekend, we say king of COTA, and he is with the 7 wins, but he hasn't won there since 2021.
Yeah.
So you're kind of going, geez, we're all kind of saying, oh, this is a done deal. Marc's going to win, but he hasn't. And he's made mistakes while leading. He did it last year, and it's that overconfidence of, I'm the king of COTA. And I think it was, and he came out and said it was purely a I am king of COTA moment. It's my favorite corner on the track, but I didn't analyze that. It obviously, the bumps get bigger as you go through the year, through the car racing, and it was just too much too soon, and down you go. But there's a Marc already doing this in his mind. Now you throw that in. So now he's sitting in the pits there going, feeling battered and bruised and going, whoa, okay, jeez. It's just another thing to think about. So no doubt it chinked the armor a little bit. I don't think it was, I don't think he would have had an answer for Bez and Martin if that didn't happen either way, to be honest. Take all the negatives away. It was a very negative weekend for Marc, and it was. He didn't paint a pretty picture for himself with that stupid move, and some other things. But where I do take my hat off to Marc is in that sprint race with the penalty, which was very much justified, 100% absolutely. Could have even been a double long lap penalty, to be honest, but the rule is a single lap. Cool. Takes his long lap, goes down to 11th. And at one point, you're seeing him not really make any kind of momentum. And you're like, oh, God, geez, Marc, 4 races in, 6 or whatever, you're going to be in this championship at that stage, 50-something points behind. Then the guy chips away. And like I said, the last 5-6 laps, he's doing kind of podium pace or Aprilia pace. Chips away, gets ahead of the likes of Ralph Fernandez. And we talk about the fragility of Marc again. There was Marc taking 2 laps to get past the Ralph Fernandez. The Marc of old would have just, cheers, goodbye. That's how fragile Marc is. But then Alex Bastianini, I would have loved to have heard Marc's comments under his helmet, because he must have been thinking, who the hell is this flippin' KTM rider? It's not supposed to be, and why are you passing me back? But anyway, made his way through the field to 5th place, 2nd of the Ducatis behind DJ Antonio, which will hurt. But the main thing was to pick up points. Okay, I know he's 40-something points behind or whatever, but the main thing in that race was damage limitations, and I think 5th was as good as it was going to get. So he fought back and he got down.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, you've summed it up, Rob. So, as I say, Jerez is going to be a big, he's going to have to, I don't want to say make a statement, because that could end up being, Marc can make many statements, but certainly Ducati as a collective are going to have to look at this situation and say, we can't keep putting our eggs in the Marc basket or the Pecco or the Digi. We need to, as a collective, come to this racetrack and do something about the Aprilias. And obviously they're going to look towards Marc to do that. But yeah, I don't see what their way forward is unless all of them seem to be struggling the first 3 or 4 laps. Look, Pecco moaned about that the whole of last year. So I don't want to say he's a factor in the equation, but I mean, he ran up front. He led the sprint for almost the whole race. Then he was moaning about vibration. So I don't know what that was about, but yeah, it's going to be a tough thing for Ducati to turn this around. They're going to have to, where last year they almost didn't have to do anything. Now they really have to put in some serious hard yards to get their bike to where they believe it should be. It's going to be very interesting to watch. And as you say, Digi is not going to take this lying down. Absolutely not. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens once we get into Europe. And I'm going to say normal order resumes, meaning that all those European riders are way more comfortable there. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, there are only European riders, bar Gura in the championship, and I think there is a South African there somewhere. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how Marc adapts and what Ducati do, because now, for the first time in it must be 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, they are properly on the back foot. And being on the back foot for them it's not what they're there for.
And there's still positive signs. I mean, if you look at the pace that DG got for the pole position and the lap times, I mean, they're not shaving tenths off, they're shaving almost seconds off these lap times, and that's again credit to Aprilia, because they forced them to do that. So Yeah, I looked at painting the whole Ducati picture. Of course, Marc's pulled out of it because it's Marc and he's the champion and stuff, and we've spoken about that. But it's not all doom and gloom. It does look doom and gloom, but DJ Antonio is showing signs. Marc, if he can just get through, if you look at his start to his season, he hasn't had a clean weekend. He hasn't had a session where it hasn't got untended, on himself, like this COTA is all himself, self-inflicted in that. But Alex Marquez doesn't seem like he's got going. Pecco, you looked at him going into the sprint and then leading the sprint, and I was like, this looked more like Pecco. Didn't rush the weekend. The bits that they showed him on the bike, he looked a bit more comfortable. Slowly built his pace up, got into the sprint, got out front, and you thought, right, this is Pecco at his finest. But then you go to Sunday again, and then you go, right, now he doesn't get the start that he did in the sprint. Now he's not out front in his comfort zone. Now he's in that pack now, and I think it's got to a point where Pecco, he doesn't get the start, and he goes, oh damn. Now, then he starts overthinking. Oh, now my front tire is going to overheat. Then things start playing on Pecco's mind, and he just can't recover from that. And then we see what happens to him. He drops down to the 10th place, and I just think he gets in his own mind, and that kills his whole race. Whereas, Digi, massive credit to Digi. You talk about maturity. Again, he's lost his factory to Caddy ride. He obviously has something to prove because, going on in the background, we've seen this a couple of years ago when contract talks are up and he's not mentioned in them, and he seems to switch on, and he becomes this ultimate MotoGP rider that we're seeing. Pole position, top Ducati guy again, shoving it on the inside of Marc, fighting against the Aprilias, and doing these wonderful things. And it's a credit to him as well because of his journey, announcing his mental health issues, and he was going to walk away and he wasn't good enough. So massive credit to him. So there's all these little needles kind of pointing out in the Ducati project at the moment that they just need to come together and sort out. Aldeguer hasn't been a consistent because of his injury and start. So they almost, that's what I said, for them this break couldn't have come sooner. They can go back to Bologna, go through the data, kind of rest riders. You just rest, take another couple of weeks to recover, come back 100%. Jerez, a track that we know we're fast at. The Aprilias are going to be really fast there though because of the package that they are at the moment. But it's at least a bit of time to reset, which is what you need right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on with that, and it'll be interesting to see. So roll on Jerez in 3 or 4 weeks' time.
Absolutely. We've got Mark Lloyd joining us. So saying hello to us. Hello, Mark. How are you doing? Great to always have Mark. Big time part of the MotoGP paddock. So always great to have Mark joining us and listening to us blab on and probably getting 90% of the things wrong. He's probably sitting there going, no.
No. Don't talk cuck.
Don't talk cuck. Pedro Acosta and KTM, speaking about Mark and the KTMs and stuff. I mean, I can't help but be impressed by this guy. He, in many ways, has no right to be there. But it was a good weekend in many ways. It's just KTM can't just have a good weekend all round. It just doesn't exist. It's either the Pedro and Anaya, which was great to see, but then, Vinales comes. I was irritated a bit with KTM again. The exact same thing happened last year, and I was irritated with it then. If Maverick's fragile, going into the weekend, we were told, Maverick is going to see how he's going to do. You've got Paul Espargaro. You need data. You need time on that racetrack. You've got this Gunther Steiner, this new owner of Tech 3. You haven't exactly sold yourself to him. Maverick Vinales comes in and then does a session, pulls out, and then there's a Paul Espargaro holding a microphone. And I'm like, make the decision at the beginning of the weekend. Send the guy home. Just send him home. Then he's got a month to recover. What was he ever going to get out of COTA? Yes, he's won there before a couple of years ago on Aprilia. Yes, but that was nowhere near the Maverick that he is now. This is an injured, a battered and bruised, mentally, physically, everything Maverick Vinales. There's a lot of cock going on behind the scenes with him and Laurent. There's too much spotlight on him. Send him home. Sort it out. Put Paul on the bike. Get data. Get something. So that irritated me. Then you had the Nea Bastianini conversation. Fantastic. The beast was back. Looked brilliant. Absolutely loved it. It looked phenomenal when he was shoving it on the inside of Marc and just it was beautiful to see. The concern is you're going to go, well, I don't think that's going to happen next time out or the next time out. Could this be a one-hit wonder? The Pedro Acosta, you're kind of going, okay, well, this is this is looking at Pedro's found something that, he's going to be challenging. I don't think he's going to be winning races by miles and that, but he's there. And you can see the weaknesses. I mean, at one point he was just a roadblock at one part of the race because he just doesn't have that pace. At some points in the race, you can see he goes into management mode. But it's like, I can't carry on like this. In the sprint race, got the penalty for his tire pressure, unfortunately. And in the main race, if you look at the pass Jorge Martin made on him in the main race, that was Pedro Acosta realizing, I'm not close enough to Bez to heat my front tire up. I've got to let Martin, you know what I mean? I think they're juggling and they're living on the fine line of that front tire pressure, and that's kind of getting them through at the moment. But take nothing away from him, again on the podium in the main race when it counts, still very much in the championship hunt. Okay, got the penalty in the sprint race, but just looking so good on that KTM and again signed for Ducati. Is the rumor, but it's pretty much cemented. I wonder if he's looking at this going, Aprilia, I should have gone to Trackhouse or something. But anyway, I think Pedro's the next thing. I think, if Marc's not necessarily the answer to Aprilia this year or potentially next, I think Pedro on a Ducati could be.
Yeah, Rob, and to me it just looks like Pedro Acosta from 2025 to 26 has matured in leaps and bounds. He's just got to a point where I think he's realized he is the future for KTM, albeit it might just be for this season. There's a bit of a responsibility there, which I think he's taken on board. And he's got to a point, it looks like to me, where he said, I'm good enough to be here. I'm good enough to put this bike. Like you say, when Martin passed him, he realized this is the best I'm going to do.
Yes.
Pedro Acosta of last year and possibly his first year on Tech 3 would have binned it and said, well, I was trying 110% and that's what happens. Now he's saying, listen, third place is actually not bad. I'm on the box. I'm happy. We had a good race. Our pace, specifically the first third of the race, he's as good as anybody out there. Obviously, when the KTM wears its tires down, he has more issues than possibly the Aprilias do. But I mean, he had pulled such a gap on Digi and Antonio in Sunday's race that Digi never ever had a sniff at getting past him, which is all he needs to do, because there's going to be a time when Martin makes a mistake or Bez falls over again, so I think my point of view is he's matured a hell of a lot. And that's what you want. The rookie, the new boy, the youngster. I mean, I think he's only 22 years old. He's a righty by anybody's standards. But to me, he's taken this project on his shoulders and he's running with it. And you can see the benefits. And I'm going to say to everybody, possibly something's not well with Brad. But to see Bastianini, and I agree with you, Bastianini did it at Ducati. One fantastic weekend, 3 or 4 poor weekends. I hope we don't see it consistently now with KTM. Let's hope he gets a bit of confidence because, as you say, Rob, to see him racing, whether it's with Marc or Digi or the Aprilias, Bastianini's a class act. And last year we saw the worst of him. Let's hope we get back to seeing the best of him because whether you like him or not, he's an absolute class actor. And watch him ride. He's super talented. And you don't want to see a guy like him being dejected and sitting at the back of the field and, not performing. So I think this was, I hope it wasn't a one-track wonder for him. Obviously, we'll see going forward, but I'd really like to see him in the mix because to me, we've always known on the Ducati, last third of a race, he was deadly. And if he can do the same on the KTM, possibly it'll benefit Pedro that they can suddenly get something where Pedro definitely drops off the last third. Maybe Anaya can help that suddenly he's, if he runs 1/10 of a second quicker in the last third of a lap, puts him closer to Martin. It'll be interesting to see, but definitely I think it was a fantastic weekend for the two of them. And I hope Bastianini has more of those.
Paul, we've got a comment here for you, aimed straight at you. Johnny Martin say, Paul, interesting that there isn't any Marc Marquez merch on display on the wall tonight.
Johnny, okay, give me a couple of weeks. We're in a new house. We're still finding our feet. I don't want to say it's packed away. I know exactly where it is, but you're quite right. In fact, after his move on Digi, I sold all the MM stuff and I'm looking for Digi caps to wear.
Okay, so Silverstone this year, my aim is to get you a Digi cap.
Okay, there we go.
That's mine. But, just going back to the KTM conversation, I want to end off with Brad, but I want to quickly finish with Pedro. I agree fully with what you're saying. Pedro has matured in the way to be, let me not be the pieces in terms of crashing in the pieces. Let me be there to pick up the pieces. So he knows he's had to accept the fact that I'm on this machine that's not going to be challenging the Bez and the Martin. No matter how hard I try and push this bike or how talented I am, it's not going to happen. But what I can do is put myself in the best position to pick up the pieces if they are there to fail, as he did in the sprint race. Okay, unfortunately got the penalty, but Bez fell off. Pedro was there to pick it up. This race, Iagura, Iagura kind of faded and Pedro kept himself in the mix, and he picked up and this is exactly what he's done the whole start of the season, and he's still in the championship hunt and he's still right there in the mix. So he's gone from being the pieces on a Sunday to picking up the pieces, and I think as you said, it's part of the maturity. The big problem we have, it's horrible to be talking so negatively and downward about Brad so early on in the season already. There were two big factors against Brad, a couple of big factors against Brad this weekend. First, obviously, being the worst of the KTMs, which is not a great thing. Even with Maverick going out. The second is obviously the results. I know he finished 12th, but there were a couple of things that almost helped those 12s, because most of the race he was 14th. Then the Iagura and everything. So these are the things you look at. But the biggest, I don't want to say slap in the face because it's too hard, but the biggest, and this is something that's going to have to be monitored, because if it carries on progressing, you're going to really go, what's the problem here? Brad's got a new crew chief, Phil Marin. We know this, Toprak Razgalioğlu's guy. And we've heard nothing but great things about this guy. KTM wouldn't go get this guy if there wasn't something about him. He's great, cool. Hasn't quite clicked yet, and, subliminally in Brad's messaging, he's always very positive and good, but, this is the first time there's that little note underneath, kind of Brad saying, we're not getting this right. This guy's kind of not understanding what I'm trying to get here. And why I say that is Bastianini has got Brad's old crew chief. So Brad's crew chief from the last couple of years at KTM, and Bastianini has him now. And he goes out at COTA and puts on a performance like that, Bastianini. So they started the weekend okay-ish, but then they got better. They found solutions. Yeah. So whether that was the old crew chief being able to take what Anea's saying and work with it, or Anea's information to him just being better and working with, I don't know. Or is it just a flash in the pan and it's one good weekend from Anea? That's why I say, if we see these kind of performances more consistently, and Anea is better than he was last year, especially over the next couple of races, then, and I say this purely on comments that I've seen, not on the South African page, not from South Africans, but from other MotoGP groups and that I'm with, from outsiders, pinpointing these things, and you're going, you can't argue with it. If all of a sudden Bastianini is improving, is it, okay, well, Brad's got a new crew chief, still not improving, and Nea's got Brad's old crew chief and improving. Is it now Brad's the problem, that he's just unable to relay the information? Personally, I don't believe that. I always believe Brad. I believe Brad's better than him, but you can't argue with facts. Something Olimoto has ramped on, Olimoto and others have ramped on us. You can't argue with the facts. And the fact that this weekend, Anea put in such a good performance and found answers, rather than more questions with Brad's old crew chief and Brad's new crew chief that was put in there to challenge him, and he's still learning his way in MotoGP. I know we can't just all throw the blame on that now, but you look at that, you paint that picture, and you step back, whether you're a Brad fan or not, and you look at it and you go, the start to the season, Brad's had 12th place, worst KTM, off the back of Brazil, that was terrible. And you're looking at this going, so that, it's concerning.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob, and exactly what you say. Had Brad been a place behind Bastianini or in the mix with him, could have been a different story. And the point you're highlighting there about the change of crew chiefs is critical. KTM, whether it was a KTM decision or a KTM and Brad decision to change crew chiefs, I'm not 100% sure. If you ever get the opportunity to chat to Brad, maybe that's one of the questions that needs to be asked. was it forced upon him or was it a mutual agreement? I don't know, but it clearly it's not working as of right now. And as diehard Brad Binder fans, and all we want is for Brad to do well. And, as you say, you watch the timing sheets in qualifying, you watch the lap timing when they're racing, and you see a guy like Bastianini coming up, and Brad's remaining where he is. It's hard for us to watch. I firmly believe there's an issue because that's not Brad. Brad's not yes, he finished 12th.
Yes.
Mir and Agura out the race puts him back in 14th position, a guy like Marini, no disrespect to him. If they were on equal equipment, 19 out of 20 races, Brad would beat Marini. I have no doubt about that. He's just not, for whatever reason, able to show us who he really is. And a lot of people are losing faith in him. And we don't know, the background to this. As you say, Robert, it's difficult to watch. We keep supporting him 100%. But I think if things don't turn around very quickly, unfortunately, there's not going to be a place in the paddock for Brad because of the rumors going around about the Moto2 riders coming through. 2 of them taking up seats. That's, possibly a seat that Brad could have looked at. So it's going to be challenging. It's really, really the balance of this year for him is going to be a big challenge. And let's, pray and hold thumbs and whatever you need to do that turns around, and it needs to turn around quickly.
We'll finish the KTM conversation with talking about the rumors and stuff. As Ollie Motor said, KTM in talks with Holgado and Alonso, the 2 Moto2 riders that you pointed out there, Paul, for next season. That does not bode well for Binder, Bastianini or Vinales. Could it be Alex Marquez and Digi in the factory team for 2027? And it's a good point that Ollie Moto's made there, with TJ Antonio, who's like really throwing his name in the mix. Going into the weekend as well with Vinales' fragility. KTM now, it almost looked like a done deal that he had signed for the factory team. We all know about it. Then the rumors are coming out that this is a make and break weekend for Vinales. He's either got to put up or shut up type thing. And you look at it and you go, there's no ways. And there was an interview with Pit Pyro where all this kind of came from, where they're like, no, we back Vinales, and of course we'll talk to him, but we don't want to lose the Moto2 riders. They're kind of KTM riders in that kind of family at the moment, and do we want to lose them? I look at it and I go, Brad's realistic options would be to stay with KTM in the Tech 3 team alongside Holgado. I think that's a one decent option there. I think Holgado is definitely moving up. Alonso, I don't think will be going KTM route either way. The latest rumor is that he'll be on the factory Honda. The factory Honda or on a Grassini Honda, if Grassini do go the Honda route. Alex Marquez, does he look at this and scratch his head and go, well, but again, I go back to the argument last week of Alex Marquez going, well, you know what, was last year my one real true year. I've had 2-3 years now of making money, but being on the most competitive bike in a great team. Do I just go for the money now? Do I go to KTM, hope that the 850cc era, something happens, I can be the main man in KTM, I can make good money, regardless of where they are and how they're doing, but let me just go that route. And I think for him, yes, especially if Grassini's going to go to Honda, I'd rather take the KTM money and go factory KTM than Grassini Honda and still be bringing money type thing. So I can see that happening. Ollie Motor, I love the DG rumor. I know DG's also tied with factory Yamaha. Like I said, I think DG's just thrown his name in the hat now. His name wasn't in the hat. It certainly is now. But going back to the Brad conversation, I think he's that standby rider. At the moment, him and Vinales. I think Bastianini, from what I hear, is potentially a Grassini rider. I think Grassini are looking and going, we've worked with him before, we've got the best out of him, we know how to get the best out of him, whether it's on a Honda, Ducati, Bastianini will be a good bet for them. So that's my concern is, unless things drastically improve, Brad's going to be that standby rider, and others are going to be ahead of him, and KTM are going to put him there. It's going to become the DJ Antonio of the paddock, where we couldn't get this guy. Okay, well, Brad's a solid enough bet, keep him there. And that frustrates me because it's like, well, it's not like you said. Brad proved last year. We know the talent of Vinales and Bastianini and stuff, but they outperformed him on better machinery. As soon as they went on the same machinery, Brad outperformed them. Over a season, I'm talking about. I know there was individual races where Vinales was better, but over a season, Brad was the better rider. So on the equal machinery, Brad is a better rider, like the Marini comment that you made. So that's the frustrating point at the moment, is Brad's not a substitute rider. Brad's not a 12th place rider. But at the moment, the reality is that's what he is.
That's what, correct. Yeah, it's a very difficult one. And the rumors about Maverick possibly going to Trackhouse, me personally with Brad, you'll get 22 weekends of 100% effort. Where Vinales, you get, when it suits him, you get 100% effort. And when it doesn't suit him, he goes home. So, but I also understand if they're paying for rides or need to look at that type of scenario, obviously Vinales being Spanish, he's probably got a lot more in the background than we'll ever know about. So, I don't know. It's a very difficult one, but let's just hope that for Brad, things turn around and he can, put his name in the forefront again, be doing what Bastianini did this week. Chances of him winning on a KTM, if Acosta can't get it right, very slim. But at least if he can throw his name in the hat like Bastianini did, suddenly he'll become relevant again. And I say that with all due respect, where at the moment he just seems to be, as you say, in the background. Nobody's talking about him. No one's saying, well, we could put him in Tech 3, we could have him here, we could, he just seems to have been forgotten. The fact that he's on a factory bike and he's a factory rider, it's just not putting his name in lights. And that's what we need, is for people to be mentioning his name again, because when they're talking about you, good or bad, they're talking about you. Where right now, I don't like the silence. The silence is never good.
Now, Oli Moto poses a good question. Yeah, I mean, this is directed at us and made South African and Brad Binder fans in general. But would you rather see Brad Binder do similar to Oliveira in World Superbike in the coming years than do what he's doing in MotoGP right now? Is a move to Tech 3 really going to bring much more of this? And it's a very good question. I look at Oliveira this past weekend, World Superbikes. Yeah. Oliveira on the podium in all 3 races, race 1, race 2, and the Super Pole race. Finding his form, finding his mojo again. Lapping on a BMW around Portimao faster than Toprak Raceoglu did. That seemed impossible for anyone to ride a BMW. I know it's a year on and more development in it, but Oliveira is he's been spoken about again, and he's on a podium again, and he's holding a trophy again, and he's, yes, I know it's World Superbikes, but it still has that substance to it. Whereas we're saying, okay, sign with Tech 3. Yes, Brad's still in MotoGP, but do we want a Brad, not being able to perform to his best, not looking happy, not being spoken about, hardly any TV coverage. The little bit of TV coverage that I did see of him looked uncomfortable on the bike, didn't look happy on the bike, didn't put the bike on the apex where he wanted to. Do we want to see that Brad, or would we see a Brad in World Superbikes on a Honda or a Yamaha or something? Please, maybe one of those, but a Ducati or something, and performing. It's a question we have to ask ourselves. I would still go with I don't know, now that Oli Motor's posed that, it's just got me thinking. Will it be much of the same? We're all saying, yeah, great, he stays with KTM. Is it going to be Groundhog Day? I don't know. Leave your questions in a postcard, please. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to catch up with some comments here and see what anyone says. Mickey Teal and his grandson. Here we go. I always love to get a little bit of comments here from him. My grandson had a question for me about why Brad is struggling to overtake other riders. I had no answer. Could you help with an answer for him? It's a great question. And, Paul, you spoke on it just there perfectly. Brad used to be that Bastianini throwing it on the inside. And Brad's biggest strength was overtaking. He could brake late. He could park that bike. He could shove it on the inside. And, for Mickey's grandson, Liam, to be pointing that out, it's not, it's not hidden information. It's out there for the world to see. The guy just hasn't got a package underneath him or the confidence to be able to do what he used to.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Rob. I think it's a confidence thing, not a confidence in his ability, a confidence in his ability to do what he needs to do. There's quite a big difference. Brad believes he's going to be world champion, but if the bike's not allowing him for his ability to, like we used to see him sideways into the turns, last on the brakes, hard on the brakes, dive the bike in, almost square the corner off and get out of there. Now you're not seeing that. Now he's trying to adapt, I believe, to a more smooth riding style, because that's possibly, with all the aero on the bikes, that's what the bikes or the engineers are saying, you got to ride the bike smoother. It's not Brad's style. But MotoGP has evolved to make that your style, and possibly that's where he's struggling to adapt. So to me, it's a confidence in the ability to do what he wants to do versus a confidence of Brad in his own ability. And I think that's the defining answer, is that he doesn't believe he can do what he has to do. So he's holding back that fraction. And we've said it, at MotoGP level, those fractions cost you time. And that's what it looks like to me. Not the, go back 5 years ago, Brad was sideways. The bike was only in a straight line when they lined up on the start straight. The rest of the time, he was left, right, back, out, backing it into the turns, and he doesn't ride like that anymore. And that's the evolution of MotoGP. Maybe next year, should Brad still be in the category with the reduction in downforce, the reduction in wings, the lack of all the launch, maybe that would benefit a guy like Brad. But he's going to have to really prove it this year to earn a place to be there next year.
So it's a very good point you make, Paul, of the evolution of MotoGP, and has that hampered riders like Brad and Morbidelli's, the more aero that goes on it, is it detracting from their riding styles, and they just can't make it work? It's a very valid point, and it's a very good way to answer the question that's been asked. It's purely down to more of a confidence thing, but there is no confidence because of the package that he has underneath him, and they just can't find the answers. If you look at Pedro Acosta, KTM have definitely, he's become the blueprint of KTM, and should he be, because he's the performing rider. And that seemed to have hampered Brad even more. But I really like the reference of the more aero and the more evolution of MotoGP. It's definitely caught the likes of Brad and other riders out there. So it's a good point you make there. So Liam, Mickey, I hope we've kind of answered that question there for you. And let's hope that we can see a Brad, back at a Jerez, where, if you remember, his rookie season in MotoGP at Jerez, where he qualified inside the top 10, and then he ran off the track, but then he came on and he was setting the fastest lap times of the race, and he had a really good introduction. Didn't have the results, but the pace was there. So let's hope we can. We're all rooting for Brad. I think that's the main thing that we need to keep in mind. We're all rooting for him, but we need some answers to some questions, just as Brad needs answers to a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
Another question you have from Michael Niemi on YouTube, and this is for me, you, Paul, and for everyone tuning in. Do you guys think Martin has a legitimate shot at winning the championship this year? This reminds me of 2024, when he would always get podiums and maximize points. So my simple answer is yes. Paul?
Absolutely, 100%.
I don't think.
Had you asked me that question the week before the first race of the year, I would have said not a chance. No. I would have said he won't make the top 5. Yes. In fact, when we did our little poll at the end of last year, I don't think we even mentioned his name.
Yeah, no, exactly.
100%.
You've answered it.
MotoGP, and anything can happen. But certainly on that question, as of right now, 100% yes.
I mean, can you? I mean, and this is where MotoGP is at the moment, and that's why it just sometimes feels like a script. Can you imagine Martin goes and wins his second world title, and takes the number 1 plate to another manufacturer again? It's like, I don't think he won't run number 1 ever again. But it's like, wouldn't it just be a story? Martin goes to Aprilia, he has the fallout, they find themselves back in love. It clicks. He wins the world championship, and he goes to Yamaha and finishes last again.
Wouldn't be the first time he's done that.
I mean, you can't write it any better, can you? Question here from, it's more of a comment than anything, and this goes back to what you said to end off the Brad conversation. Really, is Andrew Proctor says, won't Brad be better with 2027 regulations with Pirelli tires? And going back to Ollie Moto's question of, would we rather see Brad performing in a World Superbikes or again struggling with a Tech 3 KTM? That exactly what you've said, Paul, and what Andrew's kind of brought up here. I would say I would like to see Brad take on this new 2027 rules, the Pirelli tires, and see what happens there. Maybe the less aero, like I said, maybe this evolution of too much aero is hampered. Maybe the little bit more back to basics they're going to, and it's still very evolved, but that step backwards might be the step forward for Brad. So judging all of that now, if I had to answer Ollie Motor's question now, I would say, right, stay in MotoGP, give this regulation a year. If it goes the same as the script's gone, right, wash your hands with it. But because it's such a big change coming with the bikes, the tires and everything, I would say give it another shot.
Yeah, obviously, Rob, MotoGP is the pinnacle, and I hear exactly the comment, would he be better winning or challenging for a World Superbike title or whatever it is? Yes, 100%, but MotoGP is the pinnacle. Brad is a MotoGP rider. He's been in the paddock for, I think he started in 2012, so it's that's where he is. To see him move out to World Superbikes, me personally, I don't think it would be the right move. Would it extend his career because then he can race 3 or 4 years a la Bautista or a Oliveira now? Yeah, I don't know. But I think, me personally, if he gets the opportunity where we've seen guys like Morbidelli, Jack Miller, Alex Rins holding back seats that other people deserve, well, I'm going to put my hat in the ring and say, well, give Brad that opportunity next year. If he keeps a seat away from Danny Algado for 1 year, well, I don't care because he's a South African and he's the only one we've got in MotoGP, which is a selfish way of looking at it. Yeah. But the Aussies didn't moan about Miller and the Italians aren't moaning about Morbidelli. So, yeah, that to me I'd much rather see him on a Tech 3 bike in MotoGP than unless it maybe was a factory Ducati in World Superbikes. But, there's not even talk there about it. So, I think he's limited. He needs to perform for the balance of this year, get some results, and someone will pin him a ride in MotoGP. I think they would be happy to keep him in the paddock.
See, Ollie Motor, you've got your answer. If you ever go against our Brad Binder again, I'll find where you live. I'll find someone with a dog, and I'll put it in a brown bag, and I'll put it outside your house.
And you'll get a ride-through penalty.
Exactly. You'll get a long lap penalty on the show. But yeah, I love it. I love the conversation, and that's why it's always good to have that. As fans, you can be very one directional, and that's what I love about the show is you get all these different elements and ways of looking at things. So, and I think we've gone full circle with that conversation, which has been great. Yeah. From looking at, is the Tech 3 thing a cock idea to what's the new regulations and the evolution of MotoGP and his riding style. So love it. But yeah, we can move on from that now because we've got our Turkish fans waiting for the Toprak conversation, and I'm sure a lot of people are waiting for other conversations. One comment here quickly, and we'll quickly touch upon it with Alex Marquez, regarding Alex Marquez, because a couple of people have made comments about Alex Marquez and what's going on and what we think's going on. I know it's only 3 races in, but I almost forgot about Alex Marquez. Now, Paul, my take on Alex Marquez is, I said it last week, I think with the whole contract talks and KTM talks, I think it's kind of misted his thought pattern and his concentration a little bit. But the more I dig into it, I look at it and I go, I think it's a bit of him and Pecco share a bit of the same problem in a mental space. If we're not going into a race weekend believing / knowing we're going to be competitive, we struggle to be. Alex Marquez last year started off the year with a bang, and he used that momentum. That momentum is what drove him forward. He went into a race weekend going, I'm going to be competitive. Whereas I feel this year he's going into race weekends going, well, am I going to be competitive? And I think that Pecco's biggest strength was that momentum of winning. And even when I crashed, I crashed, but I crashed out of third or leading. So the next weekend, I'm going to be competitive, whereas they're going into race weekends going now, am I, what's going to go wrong? So I kind of looked at it this weekend and I kind of isolated those two riders and their mentalities and went, could be a bit of the same kind of thing with it. Just not, Marc can just wipe things away and go, I'm going to be a Marc. I'm going to be competitive. I'm going to be the fastest rider there. Where some riders are able to wipe 60%, but they're still at 40%. You know what I mean? And I just feel that's the Alex kind of problem at the moment.
Yeah, and I agree fully with that sentiment. I also think how much in his head is the fact that he's thinking, yes, Marc's struggling on this bike, so I'm struggling on this bike. And if he can't find the solution, I can't find the solution. He's not looking beyond his brother. And we've discussed it many times. I'm not saying that's the problem, but I think he's his head has now said, well, if Marc can't ride this bike, how the hell am I supposed to ride it? Because last year he could ride the bike, and the only one who could ride it better than him was Marc. And this year Marc's struggling, so he's got no, I agree, the momentum's not there. So similar thinking to Bagnaia. He's overlooking Di Gian Antonio and not thinking to himself, well, if he can do it, I can do it. I'm not suggesting that's what he thinks, but I think his mark that he follows, excuse the pun, is his brother, and that's not working at the moment. So his reference point, that's the word I was looking for. His reference point is not 3 seconds up the road. His reference point is either right in front of him or just behind him, and he's struggling to adapt to that. He hasn't looked good in qualifying. He hasn't looked good in the sprint races. He just looks unsettled, and I wonder how much of that is because he can't go to Marc, and I'm sure no matter what factory team, Grassini team, the two of them, I'm sure Marc would say to him, listen, Alex, when you do X, why don't you rather do Y? And I think Marc hasn't got a solution now, so Alex hasn't got a solution.
Good, yeah, good way of thinking of it. We've always said that Marc, Alex hasn't had the same mentality, and as you said, he's always, I don't want to say relied on his brother, but his brother has certainly been kind of the yardstick, and will always be the 100%. Yardstick for him. It's sort of like, and you go find that, you sort the bike out, then I can sort the bike out. But if you're not sorting the bike out, I can't. So it's a very good way of looking at it, and I think it kind of ties up nicely with that. Not defeatist. None of them are defeatists, but certainly going into race weekends in this current MotoGP, if you're not 100 million% sure that you're going to win, if you're 99% sure that it's not good enough.
Yeah, you're off the mark.
You're off the mark, and you're not going to be. So I hope that's broken down the Alex conversation. From what I see, I pretty much think that's exactly what we've both said. I think boils down to what that is. I'm not going to touch too much upon Raul Fernandez kind of doing what we think. The other talking points I want to talk about, Luca Marini. Top Honda in 9th. Speaking about Honda, Jean Mir, it was great to see him up there. It's just. At what point do you go? He's making the Pedro Acosta mistakes of trying to keep his name there. But you were there. If you've got to sacrifice a tenth or two to bring the thing home, bring it home. Yeah, surely Puig is going to be slapping him across the head now and saying, "Listen, but he's DNF'd more than 50% of the races that he's been on a Honda."
Yeah, correct. I think it's more than 60%. I mean, Harry is turning into the last corner. The first corner of the last lap. He's in 3rd place. He hasn't podiumed on the Honda. He's podiumed once. Come on, Jean. Just as you say, lose 3rd and go to 4th or whatever it was. But I'm bitter. Sorry, I mentioned that Maverick was going to track us. It's him they're talking about. You're going to track us. Sorry, my mistake. Yes. I cannot fathom that. Doesn't make sense to me. So it just shows he definitely has a concentration issue, because when you're at that point, you've been racing for 9 laps and you got 20 corners to go, 19 corners. Surely your mental fortitude allows you to just
bring it up.
He's a problem. Yes, the Honda's not the greatest bike, and Zarco also crashes way too often. But then you get Marini, who he's not trying to win races. He's trying to bring the bike home. Like you said, picking up the pieces as opposed to being the pieces. And Marini, he just, 9th, 10th. He's not going to win. He knows that. But he comes home every single weekend. So, Amir, just to me, he's really disappointing. Really. And I don't care if he goes to Trackhouse. I hope he doesn't. But if he does, I can't see the situation changing. Yes, the bike's way better, but his mental fortitude, whatever, just doesn't seem to cut it at the moment for me.
Yeah, like you said, it's not a pity in ways, but it is frustrating when you hear his name still being tossed around purely because he's a MotoGP world champion. But then, you listen to other stats like he's never qualified like on the front row of a MotoGP or in pole position. He's had 1 win, and you go, 1. My God, like, how is this? I know he had that great year and he was fast, but how has he stayed? That was a very long time ago.
Yeah, correct.
So, certainly hasn't done himself any favors. Didn't do himself any. It's great that you've showed pace for 9 of the 10 laps, but it means nothing if you throw the thing down the road. And it was very. But anyway, I mentioned the Marini thing because Yamaha seem to be in this boat of, kind of the Brad situation that we mentioned in the DJ Antonio, with having to go and pick up the crumbs in many ways. And Luca Marini was, on the weekend, I heard Luca Marini was linked heavily to the factory Yamaha. And again, it switched the light bulb in me and said, if I was Yamaha, I'd go get him. I would go get him. In terms of development, you're going to get a bike that's going to come home. You don't get that with Jack Miller. You're not going to get it with Fabio. He's gone. Forget Fabio. But what you're going to get with Luca is a bike coming home in one piece and with data, and someone that can translate that data. Go get him. Let the Toprak be the Foss guy. Let one of the youngsters, what's his name this Izan Guevara, potentially is going to come from Moto2, or Gonzalez. Let them go be those guys, but let Marini come and just be that solid, reliable source of information. So when I heard that, I thought, I can see that happening. DJ Antonio, as I said, has also become heavily linked with Yamaha, purely, I think, again, on his performances. And you can't knock him, because, again, he's making the Ducati work when others can't, and he's the fastest Ducati rider, and he's shown this maturity. He's shown, he's in the prime. It seems like he's in the prime, so makes a good shot for himself. So that was just another talking point that I wanted to bring into. And for Yamaha, again, looking at actual options, it's probably the best they're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'll be a big loss for Honda if they let Marini go, even if they sidestepped him to LCR, which it doesn't sound like they're going to do. But certainly I think he, from what you've said, Rob, and I've taken a completely different outlook on him from what you've said about the way he is with his debriefs and how intelligent he is at getting his point across. Some people just can't articulate the way they want things to work. He clearly can. Now, if he takes that to Yamaha, without a doubt, like you say, let Toprak be their rider to get the glory. Let Marini be the rider to move the project forward, and it'll go from strength to strength. There's no doubt.
As we're talking, I've just been sent a link about Ducati and Honda get their rookie superstars, but obviously I can't click on it, because I'm on my phone and it's yet. But I'm not going to get into that now. We can talk about that later on and stuff, because we've already been talking a long time. But I mean, there is this huge link that Honda won 6 bikes on the grid. Cressini, and the more you play out the Cressini situation, you look at it and you go, right, Alex is talking to KTM and he's potentially gone. Then there's this talk of Furman Aldeguer going to VR46. And you look at it and you go, why would that move happen if Grassini weren't thinking of leaving Ducati? Why would you take a rider out of a very comfortable situation? He flourishes, he's won a race there, he looks comfortable, it's all great and bells and whistles and that, to move him into VR46 when you're looking for other riders to potentially come in. And it all kind of points to the fact that we could seriously see Grassini go to Honda. There'll be money involved. There'll be, cool, we'll bring money and we'll give you this rider. The fact that Ducati went and maybe said, cool, we're not going to offer Alex anything really. We're going to cut down on your Ducati contract and we potentially want to move Furman. You can see Grassini going, okay, cool, that's fine. Thank you, take your bikes. We'll go with Honda. They're promising us bikes with a good, budget. They're promising us a David Alonso, whoever, one of these Moto2 kind of stars. So goodbye. So that's when I first heard that rumor, I was kind of like, nah. But, with Brazil, you were kind of like, well, Ducati need the spots. They're not going to give that up. And it's been a great kind of development team for them. It's been a great relationship. There's no reason why. But now when you break it down more and more, you're looking at this going, well, why not? Honda have got the power. Cressini are always going to be that team that are going to go for financially what's going to be best for them, result based as well, but they seem to just make it work either way. And it looks like that they're going this way. You look at it and you go, well, you're going to get Alonso potentially, and then who else? You don't want a Mir, you don't want a Rins, you don't want a Morbidelli, a Brad. Someone's commented here, Herman Tukupala, he's commented here, a Turkish guy, he's commented here saying potentially, Hamat's the Indian, a man from India. But, he's commented here, Brad, potentially Cressini, Honda. You would like to think so, but probably no. Cressini's always been a European based team. They've always
Yeah.
taken European-based riders on that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but anyway, that's another kind of spanner in the works of this whole MotoGP, who's going where, and it keeps things exciting, if anything else.
Yeah, listen, this year there's certainly a lot of, what's the right word? Turmoil in the MotoGP fold, because first of all, we all thought that besides Bezzecchi signing for Aprilia, we all thought by now Marc would have re-signed with Ducati. And I think once he does that, all the cards will start to fall into place. A lot of people are waiting for him to decide. But then you get the story. So now if Ducati said to Gresini, no, we take in Furman, we need him in VR46 because he's on a Ducati contract. And then suddenly Gresini are like, what? You taking our rider and giving us no option? So, okay, we'll take our ball and go play with Honda.
Yeah.
So I think that was the catalyst. Whether it happens or not, I think, you get to a point like with, what's her name, Nadia Padovani. She gets to a point where she's bowed down to Ducati for how many seasons? You get to a point where you're like, stop calling the shots. We run the team. We're a happy family. You making us an unhappy family. Okay, we'll move on. I think there's there's no smoke without fire. So it could be a very real split in that relationship, which I think by mid-season we'll kind of know, but it's certainly making things very, very interesting for who's going to be where next year, because it's not going to be the usual 8 Ducatis, 6 Aprilias, 4 of the, it's throwing the cat amongst the pigeons in more ways than one.
Paul, there's the big factor on, and our Turkish fans, please, straight after this, we're ending off with Toprak because he deserves the spotlight in my mind. But to end off this conversation, there's the other big factor, and people ask about, why is all this MotoGP rider rumor started so early? And I could never really find the indefinite answer until I spoke to someone early last week and posed this question to them. Also, another big MotoGP fan here in the UK. And he said to me, think about it. In August this year, I think it's August this year, will be the first official test of the 850s. So now, if you're Yamaha, do you want a Fabio Quartararo testing your 850?
Yeah.
No, you don't. If you're Ducati, do you want to pick up Bagnaia testing your 850 going to Aprilia? No, you don't. If you're Aprilia and Jorge Martin's gone, as well as he's doing, and you love him now because he's winning, do you want him testing your bike for next year? No, you don't. So all of a sudden you might have a situation where you have this official test and you're not going to have any riders to put on the actual things. You're going to have, in Yamaha's case, this is where maybe Jack Miller could potentially keep his ride, is at that test, because Rins is gone. You're not really going to. You're going to have Augusto Fernandez, but you need a proper
race.
You need a racer to be doing. So is Jack Miller now an option? Because again, Yamaha left with scraps, and it's Miller. He's got a little bit of value to add to it. Okay, you've got Toprak potentially. Well, you will have Toprak as well, but that is a factor on why all these things are trying to be sorted out now, so that by the time the 850 test comes, you have a bit more clarity of who can do what.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's a very broad overview of looking at it, because once the contract, if they sign by then, well, if they're not signed, you can't say your rider, well, you're not testing the bike, because what if he's going to sign the contract? And if they've already signed for a different manufacturer, it's not like Quartararo can say, well, okay, I'm racing for Yamaha, but I'm going to go test the Honda for a weekend. So it's really going to be an interesting scenario, because otherwise you're just going to have all these 850s being tested by one of their, possibly, for example, a Marc Marquez or the Aprilia Bezzecchi, and then their test riders testing the bike, which won't help them too much. So it'll be a very, very interesting scenario when that happens.
Again, KTM's situation, come the test, and you've got Anaya potentially leaving, Pedro leaving, Vinales not in the picture. Okay, well then Brad's you're gonna have Paul and Danny, which are good bets, but you want that current car, which
guy who's racing currently, absolutely.
So it was a really good point that he made, and I'd never
valid point.
That's when you just have those great conversations. You get lost in the conversation.
Absolutely.
Paul, let's finish off. Everyone, let's finish off with a Toprak Razgatlioglu conversation, and I was hugely impressed. I've said Toprak's goal and focus this year needs to be a Yamaha. The Yamaha's not competitive, but he can be. The first thing is be, if not the leading Yamaha, the second Yamaha. And he went out this weekend, and I know in qualifying and that and the sprint races by COTA or whatever, but if I looked at all, and I do keep a keen eye on Toprak because I am a massive fan. I really am. I love the way he rides a motorcycle, how he looks on a motorcycle, and he's had one or two crashes, but he's not a big crasher. I really just love Toprak. I really, 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 really do. And I looked at him this weekend in most sessions, and people make the mistake of thinking it was his first time at COTA. It wasn't. He had been there on a BMW Superbike before. He had done laps, but not in a race weekend. He hadn't been on so he had done laps. He knew his way around COTA, but not on a full-blown MotoGP race bike. Okay, so he came in with that hindrance, but not as severe as people think. He did know his way around COTA, but still, he came there on a Yamaha MotoGP bike, and in every session, only towards the end of every session was he bettered by a Fabio or sometimes a Jack. Most of the time he was a second Yamaha. But for most of the session, he was the top Yamaha and quickly the top Yamaha, and he was ahead of Brad most of the time as well. And he was in the mix. When I say in the mix, Yamaha in the mix is between 10th and 14th type thing. Realistically. And then he goes on the race weekend again, where you looked at Fabio potentially just giving up. We've spoken about it. I think Fabio again doesn't get the start, qualified badly. I'm just going to down tools. I'm not going to stick my neck out. I'm jumping ship. I'm gone. Jack Miller, we know, will give 100% to the end, but a Toprak beats a Jack Miller giving 100% to the end, and a Toprak still not, still learning. And so, anyway, I mean, I can go on about it forever. I was just very impressed with Toprak Raskarioglu, first of the Yamahas. They went into the weekend saying they were going to make big changes. They were going to turn that Yamaha upside down to try and suit him. They found something because there was definitely a little bit more pace there. Now he goes, you've spoken about the European factor of getting into that comfort zone. Now he starts getting into the territory where I think he can find a bit of familiarity, a bit of a comfort zone kind of feel, and he can really start maybe pushing those boundaries even more. And I think the Toprak conversation is just going to get better, and I think he is going to be Yamaha's shining light. I really do believe that.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt, and especially if you listen to the comments that Quartararo came with after the race, where he said Yamaha has absolutely no idea how to fix the issues. He's not endearing himself to his current team. Yes, and I understand we say sometimes Brad is too politically correct because we hear him saying what we know KTM want him to say. Where Fabio, he just doesn't give a damn. But he's also, now his crew and the people back at Yamaha are saying, well, he thinks we're a bunch of idiots. So the point is, I think he's alienating himself, where Toprak is doing what any top professional motorcycle rider should do. He's going there, he's doing a job, and he's improving bit by bit. And we know the Yamaha ain't going to win a race anytime soon. But as you say, we said it at the beginning of the year. We actually said his benchmark should be Quartararo. I think every Yamaha rider is now using Toprak as the benchmark. That's why what you say, Rob, they're only getting ahead of him, and it's only Quartararo, right at the end of the session. Whether they've poached his data, whatever it is, we don't know. But it seems to me that Toprak can get on a bike. He's got a very clear idea of what he wants. They give it to him, and he gets the best out of the machine much quicker than possibly a Miller, definitely than a Rins. And Quartararo, he's a bit of an enigma to me. But certainly Toprak. My disappointment with him is he's on a bike that doesn't allow us in MotoGP to see his true potential. Because no matter how good you are, if the bike is that far behind, and say what you want, when the four Yamahas are consistently at the back of the grid, it shows the bike is not capable. So Toprak is in a position where he can't showcase his true talent near the front of the grid. He's showcasing it to the Yamaha factory, and those people, they understand how good he is. But a general guy watching MotoGP is like, check this out, world superbike champion, and he can't break into the top 10 here. So that to me is a bit of a disappointment. But, I don't think him or anybody realized or predicted that this new V4 would be, I'm going to say, as bad as it is. I think they were expecting it to be a little bit closer to being on pace, possibly to Honda pace, than what it is right now. So it's really been a disappointment. And obviously Quartararo, he's beyond calling a spade a spade. But I think a lot of work needs to be done, and whether or not, they can still test as much as they want. They can use their MotoGP riders. Hopefully within the next 3 or 4 weekends of racing, they start to build a platform that starts to work, because it is, Yamaha's a big brand. It's a team that should be near the front. Obviously, we've questioned why they bring a V4 for one season. Obviously, they were going to be on the back foot, but it's nowhere near what it should be. And as I say, my point being, it's disappointing for a guy like Toprak, who can't showcase his absolute talent.
Yeah, as what's this, EBN88TT on YouTube says, Toprak, the script was always very much this, and this was going to lead me into the point I was going to make. 2026 was going to be cool, ride the 1000cc, great, but forget about the tires or whatever, just do as best you can, but learn the circuits, because come 2027, bit more familiarity with Pirelli tires. You're going into each race weekend knowing where you are, the tracks and everything. My only concern is, and we saw it all those years back with the likes of Nicky Hayden and stuff, on the big 1000cc MotoGP bike could compete, because of their size, and Toprak's is the tallest rider in MotoGP. And then back then, when they went back to 850s or 800s, Nicky Hayden went from being number one to, the guy couldn't buy a top 10 for the first couple of races because the bike was just too small for him in many ways. So I hope that doesn't hamper Toprak. But exactly what the comment was there, I am very keen to see a Toprak after a year, more comfortable on Pirelli tires. And like you said, the biggest frustration at the moment is exactly what you said, Paul, is if you're sitting next to somewhat of a MotoGP fan and they go, this Toprak guy is useless. He was dominating World Superbikes, and he's not. And you're like, whoa. Yeah. You plant him with an elbow first, you put him in a headlock, and then you say, listen, that's not the story. But that's but that's what you're going to have to say. And it's kind of the Brad conversation. The frustration with the Brad is like you always feel like you what's the word I'm looking for? You're like you're talking up the rider when you should, I shouldn't have to be talking this guy up. His talent's there. It's for whatever reason. We know the Yamaha reason, and we kind of know the KTM reason, but we don't know the KTM reason because Pedro and Aprilia did it here. But you know what I mean? And that, as you said, that's the frustration with the Toprak, is he's not going to be able to fully showcase the superb rider that he is. And we're going to have to deal with it. And credit to him, he's come out in each of his debriefs and said, like after Brazil, I was really down. I was like down in the dumps, because a rider like Toprak is going to be questioning himself. He's going to be like, I know the bike's not quite there, but I was just dominating World Superbike rider that made a Yamaha win there and a BMW win there, and why am I not doing this? So they're always going to point back to themselves, these guys. That's going to be the first place they point. But he seems to handle that as well and come out and put in a really good performance. So I'm impressed with the Toprak project.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob, and I think most people, because he's one of those riders who's endeared himself to the crowd, and you followed him in World Superbikes, then he jumped to the BM and no one kind of gave him a chance, and he showcased how good he is. Now he's taken I'm going to say a leap of faith. He jumped on a bike that for a couple of seasons now hasn't been competitive. He knew that, but it was an into MotoGP. And I agree with part of your sentiment that they've said to him, don't worry about this year. But that's easy to say to someone who's not a previous motorcycle world champion and who's in a championship to do well. He's not there to finish 18th or 19th. He wants to finish first. So I think I hear your sentiment. I just think it's very difficult for a guy like him. He's a born winner. He wants to win. He wants to get the best out of it. And he can't, the bike doesn't allow him. We understand as any diehard fan of any sport, they know their sport, I'm going to say intricately. We understand that. But the guy watching in the stands, just a general spectator, like we said, he's disappointed. So I hope that he gets through this year, first of all, unscathed, no injuries, but he's very smooth. He doesn't look like the kind of guy who's going to flick it down the road too often. And hopefully next year, the bike will be, the playing field will be a little bit level, because right now Yamaha it's almost like they're in a different championship.
Absolutely. So our Turkish mate that joined us, thank you again. Please go tell all your Turkish mates that we love Toprak. They're all welcome here. We'll always say positive things about him. Ken and Dennis Onchu have got to pull their socks up for me. Dennis Onchu hasn't really made the step up in Moto2 on the Mark VDS bike just yet, but we know there's a talent there. Ken Onchu on the weekend in World Supersport, pole position in World Supersport by like 0.6 of a second, and then goes and crashes the bike and doesn't get the results it is. So Toprak needs to get in their ear. But anyway, great. Love to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Comment here. Speaking about the World Superbike paddock, quick comment here. Mike Archer, what about Bulliger as an option? Mike, we've spoken about it. This is the problem Ducati have. If they're going to lose 2 more bikes on the grid next year, where do they put these riders? Certainly Bulliger is going to be saying, right, I'm going to walk World Superbikes this year. You know, dominated the first 4 main races and the 2 sprint races. You know, he's the dominant force in World Superbike this year. There's no doubt about it. And he's going to want to get up into MotoGP. Obviously, VL46 is an option with them. If they get rid of Morbidelli and DJ Antonio, Aldeguer and probably Bulliger will be the riders there. The factory Ducati being Marc Marquez and potentially Bulliger. Bulliger could go in there as well. And another rider coming into the Ducati team there. But Bulliger certainly one to go in there. World Superbikes was great this weekend. Ducati won 2. Bulliger dominating there. Ikalakawona showing why Ducati put their faith in him. 2 second places. I still want to see more from him because you're on a factory Ducati. That's like, you know, you should be finishing there. But a little bit, show me a couple more races and I'll fully believe. And that great to see Miguel Oliveira on the BMW. As I said, I was impressed. I know it's his home Grand Prix and that, but to go in qualifying and outpace Toprak on a BMW, second time out, really, you know, testing was hampered by rain and stuff. And it was just great to see Miguel smiling again. The fans loved him and just looking competitive again. What I will say about World Superbike, which was very disappointing for me, or not very disappointing, it just shows you talk about the evolution of MotoGP and how the level's been taken up. I look at Johnny Ray and I still see like a fantastic 6-time world champion there. Didn't have a good time 2 years on a Yamaha, glimpses, but never really took off. Came in as the replacement for Jay Dixon on the Honda, you know, this weekend at Portimao, track he loves. And I thought, you know, a screaming inline 4 would maybe just suit Johnny's style before. It's really where he came from, you know, Kawasaki and the Honda before that. Just shows you where World Superbikes has gone. People underestimate World Superbikes. Johnny Ray finished 15th and 17th, or something. You know, Miles at Batista's not even a conversation anymore. You know, you got the likes of Montella up there, and that's so. Credit to World Superbikes. It's a very competitive championship with very competitive riders, and still a championship that I love to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. But just going back to the comment that started the conversation, I don't believe there's a place in MotoGP for Bulliger. He had his shot. He had Moto3, he had Moto2. He couldn't cut it. I can't see why he would do it now. Personal opinion, I think that the 2 or 3 Moto2 riders that are being spoken about are more talented than him. You know, in Moto3 and Moto2, he'd have moments of glory. So in my opinion, I don't believe there's a space in MotoGP for him. Who are you going to move out to put him in? You know, honestly speaking, yes, he's doing fantastic in World Superbikes, but I think he's on a bike that gives him the ability. I don't know. I just don't see him making it in MotoGP. I don't see him even getting offered I know he had the ride at the end of last year, but I can't see it happening. I could be wrong, but VR46 probably the only option, but I don't see it happening.
Okay, Paul, that's a double long lap penalty for you going against me. I don't know how many times I must tell you, but listen, Paul, I hear exactly what you're saying. I think going back to the conversation again about the 850 testing, we know Bulliger is an official Ducati MotoGP test rider as well. You know, I wonder how much of that's going to play into it. If this guy climbs on that bike and is, you know, competitive-ish, maybe if they go and he's not, I think that could be a yardstick on how it goes. But certainly, it's you know, he's going to sit there and go, right, I'm not staying in World Superbike. You know, as we said, all these riders have got arrogance. Bulliger looks like he's got that arrogance about him already. Like, I'm going to dominate World Superbikes, but then if Toprak can go to MotoGP, I'm going to MotoGP. So that's going to be the conversation. Whether Ducati do have the balls to say, okay, well, it's not with us. Goodbye. We're as Oli Moto says here, Rossi's choosing Marini, his half brother, over you for the second seat there, or we're choosing this guy over you for that seat. Cheers, you're going to have to find another route. Then there's the Yamaha options, the Pramac options, the whatever other options there are. But we know Ducati can be ruthless, but, in terms of if he does bring home a World Superbike Championship for them, and I don't want to stay in World Superbikes, well then, and he's a Pirelli rider, I'm a Pirelli man.
Yeah, it's going to be. It's really a difficult one. It puts, it puts Ducati. I don't want to say it puts them in a spot, but it certainly does, because if that's his thinking that I'm your now 2 times world champion or whatever it is, I need to be in the, as you say, Toprak made it into MotoGP. I would like to also follow that path. I don't know if there's a place for him. I think his previous MotoGP record, and I know he was in not MotoGP, but Moto3, Moto2, I think that might be the stumbling block for him. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it happening.
All right, VR46 have also got this problem, as Oli Moto and now Moshe Selabalo, I hope I said that right, Moshe, points out, they've got to make this decision. They've proved they've got a competitive team, with DJ Antonio, Morbidelli has shown signs of brilliance before, Bezzecchi when he was there and stuff. So they've got a good package. Looks like they're going to stay with Ducati. Well, Ducati going to need them to stay with them to fall back. But then exactly what these guys are saying. So Rossi's got a basket of riders: Bulligar, Marini potentially, Vietti potentially, DJ Antonio, Morbidelli. There's only 2 spots. There's 5 riders there. There's 2 spots, and these are these aren't outside. These are his VR46 Academy riders, other than DJ Antonio. Where does your alliance lie there? So big conversation, big factors still to be decided.
And the question is, how much of a say do Ducati have? With VR46, yes, Furman's going to be a done deal, almost guaranteed, because he's on a Ducati contract, and we know that it's probably Marc and Pedro. So that doesn't leave them much of an option. So, suddenly they've got 5 riders looking at 1 seat. Now what do you do? Marini, big ties to the owner. Digi proving that he deserves the spot. Morbidelli's probably the one who's going to get chucked under the bus. Vietti, I'm not sold on Vietti. Also had many opportunities, but are him and Bulliger not in the same ilk? I don't know. Bulliger certainly, and all credit to him, he stepped up to World Superbikes, first World Supersport, then World Superbikes. He's run with it, and he's really accomplished. But moving back to MotoGP, that's, now we're going back into the cauldron of motorcycle racing. That is the pressure, and I don't think you could deal with the pressure in Moto3 and Moto2. The pressure coming from being a VR46 Academy rider, because the other riders were performing. I don't know. It's a difficult one. Let's see how it pans out. I don't know on your side if anybody besides Bulliger is talking about him in MotoGP. I certainly haven't read or seen anything.
No. That's it. It's just a conversation you look at, and it's being mentioned, but certainly not as big as some of the other names.
It's not being bandied about.
Paul, I think that's it. It's been an absolutely fantastic show once again. Thank you to you and to each and every one that commented and left some great comments. It's been some great conversations as always. As I said, gone full circle with many of the conversations, bringing in elements that you don't even think of, and it's just what makes the show great. A community of fans that can just sit down and talk MotoGP, agree to disagree, and agree on a lot of things, disagree on a lot of things, and just have a great conversation. So it's brilliant. We've got a couple of weeks break now. I am desperately going to do everything in my power to fill that up with a Shane Woodley, with a Brad Binder, who has promised me. Again, I just, it always just feels so hard to message Brad after a tough weekend and say, hey, listen, I know you had a cuck weekend. Can you come talk to people about your cuck weekend? your cuck start to the season where everyone's just going to lambaste you. So I'm going to try and be as gentle as I can with that. I'm pretty sure I can get Rushay, no doubt, and the Darren and everyone else will still be an ongoing conversation. So keep a look at on our social media for that, and hopefully we can keep you entertained. Otherwise, get the lawnmowers out, get the kitchen utensils out, make them off some breakfast, entertain the kids for a couple of weeks, and then we'll be back to European MotoGP.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Rob, it's been a fantastic pleasure once again. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and for all the support they give us, the questions, just the interactiveness about it. And what I love doing is, I mean, obviously it's Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, I go through all the comments because I don't see them. So then I read through, and it's fantastic. So thanks to everyone, and thanks to you for having me again.
Fantastic. Everybody have a great further rest of your week. And until the next MotoGP, stay happy and healthy, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Catch you then. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.